Thank you. Please sit down. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Very warm welcome to this, our first full council meeting of 2022. And for those of you who weren't here earlier, a very happy new year to you all. Welcome also to those members of the public joining us today in the public gallery. It's nice to see you here with us, and to those watching us via the feed on YouTube. For those in the building, we'll just start with the safety information. We're not anticipating any evacuations today. Should there be any alarm, please leave the chamber through your nearest exit and congregate on College Green near the cathedral. For COVID security, seating has been arranged so hopefully everybody is at least 1 metre apart. There are additional COVID measures behind the scenes, and we are all advised to wear masks except when speaking or if you have a medical exemption. And when we break for the adjournment, please just be mindful of social distancing and try and maintain space with those around you. Agenda item 2 is apologies. I've had apologies from Councillors Ali, Hartley, Geeta, Morris, Goggin and Bradshaw. Do we have any other apologies from the floor? No? OK, good. Right, agenda item 3 is declarations of interest. Now, we'll turn first to the golden motion. I'm aware... Oh, sorry, Councillor Clark.
My Lord Mayor, there's a great deal of confusion around the what criteria we should be working to. I've just spoken, somebody in one of the other parties is applying different criteria than the one that we have. I don't know what the other parties are doing. I don't know whether it would be useful if Tim O'Gara could just give us a bit of clarification in what way that we should be going with this, because my group has been working on if you rent a room in your home, you cannot attend. If you own a property and you're a landlord, you cannot attend. If you are a private renter, you cannot attend. And I understand other groups are doing slightly differently. So I would really appreciate it if we could have some clarity on this. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything you can or would like to say that assists with that? Right, OK. Yeah, please do.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I have sent advice around to all councillors. Admittedly, I can't provide bespoke advice to every single councillor. I'm happy to meet with any councillor in the adjournment. I've been approached by a few councillors already today and have given them specific advice. It is ultimately a matter for individual councillors, and if you want some advice, I can provide that, but it will ultimately need to be your decision as to whether or not you participate in that particular item of business or not. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. So, as become clear for members of the public wondering what this is all about, the golden motion that we're considering later today is on the subject of private landlords and private tenancies. And there are a number of councillors in the room who have a declarable interest in that, either because you are a landlord yourself, or because you are a tenant, or potentially because you are in receipt of housing benefit, or any combination of those things. So what I would ask for at this stage is any member who wishes to declare an interest for any of those reasons related to the golden motion, please, and which would mean that you would not then be able to participate in the debate or vote on that item. Please raise your hands now so it's clear to officers to see that you are declaring an interest, and just keep your hands in the air so that officers can clearly see who that applies to. And just bear with us while we make sure that's all clearly noted. What I will say, if anyone isn't certain and isn't declaring at the moment and would like to seek advice and declare an interest as we arrive at that item on the agenda, I will allow an opportunity for that. Okay, thank you. Just happy? Okay, thank you very much. So, aside from the golden motion, does any member have any interest to declare related to any other item on today's agenda? Good. Okay, thank you. In which case, we will move to agenda item 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, in fact, meetings. And I move that the minutes of the meetings of full council held on the 12th of October, both meetings held on the 9th of November, and both meetings held on the 7th of December, so that's 5 in total, are agreed as a correct record. Do I have a seconder for that?
Seconded, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Galandris. Can I take it, please, that the minutes are agreed? All those in favour say aye. Any against? Good, then all 5 sets of those minutes are agreed. Thank you very much. Agenda item 5 is Lord Mayor's business, and today I have none, so we will move straight to agenda item 6, which is public forum. We have 30 minutes allowed for public forum, which will split between taking statements and questions. Details of all of the statements and questions, and we have no petitions at this meeting, all of the statements and questions received have been published on the website. And I will go through the list, calling on those who have indicated to us that they want to attend or that they intend to be here today. We'll start with public statements. We've received a total of 10 public statements, of whom I believe 9 have told us that they intend to be here today. So we'll go through those in order. Each person, when I call upon you, will have 1 minute to speak to us about your statement. All of the statements have been received, published and distributed to councillors in advance. So my advice to you is not try and read the whole thing out verbatim and cram it into a minute. Use your 1 minute to pick out highlights and key points that you want to bring to councillors' attention. So the first statement is from Julia Gellatley on the plant-based treaty. And I apologise if I've mispronounced your name. Julia, are you with us? No, I don't see anyone indicating. So we will move then to public statement number 2 on behalf of United Voices of the World on sexual entertainment venues. Do we have anyone speaking? Oh, we do. Okay, the microphone's just coming to you. Okay, so you have 1 minute to speak to us about your statement.
Thank you. The nil cap policy pretends to have arisen out of a concern for women's safety, yet there is zero empirical evidence to prove any correlation between the existence of strip clubs and violence against women. It is also an idea of safety that directly excludes the workers within the clubs. In Bristol, the crime statistics show that both strip clubs are among the safest spaces for women in the nighttime economy, but a nil cap threatens to force workers from these spaces and into private and regulated parties where they face greater risk of violence. As of July 2021, 5.2% of the city's working population claimed out of work benefits. It is unconscionable that a city council would choose to force over 100 workers, the majority of whom are women and LGBTQ+ people, who are already disproportionately affected by inequalities in the job market, into unemployment, financial insecurity or dangerous work. We might be sex workers, but we are also your constituents, and our civil rights and safety should be considered equitably.
Thank you very much. Our next statement is public statement number 3 from Helen Powell on behalf of We Love Stoke Lodge. Helen, just bear with us while we get the microphone to you. Okay, you have 1 minute, Helen.
It's 3 years since Cottam School put up a fence around historic parkland at Stoke Lodge. It's 2 years since Cottam locked everyone out during the first lockdown at the time we most needed open space. It's 1 year since the community offered a solution that's been shown to work elsewhere. BCC lawyers continue to fight our applications to register the land as a town or village green. And the question is why? In 2018, BCC told the High Court that Cottam School took its lease knowing that the playing fields were for shared use and that it was important to protect informal recreational use. Now, I'm sure the council wasn't misleading the court, so why is it fighting these applications? Why not stay neutral? Why is the council spending public money actively fighting the preservation of public space when it recently spent money defending the same thing in court?
Thank you very much. And public statement 4 is Paul Collins. There we are. Paul, you have 1 minute to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you. In just 4 weeks' time, the Mayor's due to decide whether to close Kingsdown Sports Centre. The Council's decision-making process has not been transparent and has relied on incorrect or misleading information. Firstly, regarding the consultation, The councillors refused to disclose what decisions were made about the centre before consulting. They appear to have that information, but say it would take too long to find it. The councillors failed to consult hard-to-reach groups such as those who use the centre, including pupils of Cottam School and others. That is not proper consultation. The councillors decided to delay publication of its response to the consultation until just before the Mayor's due to make his decision. In explaining who use the centre, the council say it's only those who live in the Cottam ward. That is wrong and misleading. Proper assessment of who use the centre, promised by the council last September, has still not been published. Councillors failed to take into account the centre's value to the NHS as a GP referral centre and partner. Finally, I'd like to ask the Mayor to please delay his decision until he has all the correct and relevant information before him. That would be the responsible thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Public statement number 5 is from Jill Tarleton. Jill, down at the front. Thank you, Jill. You have 1 minute to speak to us, please.
Killer heat waves, such as the one in 2003 that killed 70,000 people across Europe, will occur every other year by 2050. They are worse in cities due to the urban heat island effect, which can raise temperatures by an extra 10 degrees. Our best defence against this is our city trees. They act as giant air conditioners, cooling the air around them by several degrees. They would save the lives of our elderly, vulnerable and socially disadvantaged, who are the most at risk. But these trees must be where they are needed most in the city centre, so it is of great concern that in Bristol we continue to build on green spaces and fell trees. One example of this is the Baltic Wharf, where 100 mature trees are under threat in an area of very low tree cover. City trees should be left alone to save lives. Please stop further destruction of city trees to protect our children from the ravages of climate breakdown.
Thank you very much. And public statement number 6 is John Tarleton. John, are you right next door? There we go. John, you have 1 minute to speak to us.
Okay, thank you. The climate and ecological emergencies are supported by existing planning policies, yet these are generally disregarded by planning officers. When we try to protect Bristol's valuable green spaces, we are told they must go because there is a housing crisis. A genuine brownfield site recently became available at St Mary Le Port, large enough for up to 500 homes and 1,500 people desperate for a place to live. But instead of homes, we'll be getting yet another office and retail block, even though offices and retail spaces are being abandoned elsewhere in the city centre. It seems that the housing crisis overrules the climate and ecological emergencies, even though housing in a city centre devoid of trees and green spaces will not be sustainable in the long term. But when developers want to build offices, the housing crisis is quietly forgotten. When asked where should we build houses if not on green spaces, we can answer St Mary Le Port. With the abandonment of office and retail space in city centres, there are and will be plenty of genuine brownfield sites available, and green spaces should be protected to enable future generations to live in the city centre. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Public statement number 7 is Anita Bennett on St Christopher's School. Anita, you have 1 minute, please.
Thank you. I'm sure that everybody here either saw or read the Sunday Times article about the young lad who was locked up in an ATU with severe autism. And that could be your child, it could be mine sometime. We have an incredibly valuable asset in St. Christopher's School that's been here for 70 years as a beacon of excellence. Through mismanagement and misunderstanding, the school was sold off to an unscrupulous provider. And I've just come out of a meeting with the proposed developers for the site who want 6-story high buildings. And I wanted to say that it's becoming very, very clear to me, and I hope it is to people here, that this is a community asset. It has served the city very well. We not only have the crisis with the young students, we also have a number of fostered children who could be very, very easily accommodated up there, many of them with special needs, a high proportion of them. So I'm really hoping that we can come together. all of us in every single party, individuals, to look at this as a valuable community asset for the entire city and beyond. Just like Windmill Hill, that was proven to be a community asset, and St. Ursula's School that we came under the support.
Anita,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Public statement number 8 is David Redgewell on behalf of South West Transport Network. David, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, we've gone through an interesting Christmas period. We've now rescued about 25% of the bus network with the Metro, Mayor, but we've still faced with a crisis of the COVID-19 bus operator grant running out in April. If that happens, we will have an awful lot of buses parked in the bus carriages of Stagecoach and First Group in the city region. I urge again today, Marvin, Dan Norris, the leaders of the parties on this council, to write to Baroness Fear and Grant Shapps and outline how serious it is our bus services grant, which is funded from the Department for Transport. If that is withdrawn, we will have an awful lot of bus cuts in the city. We also have problems at the moment where buses are going to be withdrawn or cut back. The number 4 won't go to Cribbs Causeway. It'll only go as far as Hembury. We've got buses going to turn round at Cherry Gardens at Bitton. None of these sites are fit for interchange. No money's been spent on CTCTV, lighting, safety and community safety. We've really got to look at these bus assets. And the other thing is pulling out bus lanes in the Hembury area and telling South Gloucestershire Council is perfectly acceptable on a major project is not acceptable to bus users, and I think we should be consulted. But we've really got to work hard on this bus issue, Mr Mayor. It is very, very serious. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And in fact, while you've got the microphone, you have a separate statement as well on behalf of Bristol Equalities Forum. So we'll ask you to...
This is not me, I have to stress. I'm a trustee, as the Mayor knows and everybody in this room knows. But it is from the Forum and the Equalities groups. There is a view that we should really move towards more hybrid meeting and able to allow disabled people to speak online in the way Bath and North East Somerset, South Gloucestershire Council and North Somerset are, Somerset County Council, Mendip District Council and Gloucestershire are. These are hybrid arrangements and they work where they allow people to zoom in and make their contribution, especially with COVID being so high. And I really would ask the council to look at this. Gordon Richardson is the chair of the organisation, not me, but he really does want this to be looked at in line. So can we please ask the Chief Executive to go back again? It's not just this council it applies to. I'd also ask him to look at whether WECA's practices are fit for purpose during the middle of a very strong COVID crisis. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you very much. And finally, for statements, public statement number 9, Claire Maynell on Bristol Fair Renting Campaign. Claire, thank you. You have 1 minute, please.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Claire. I'm a member of the Bristol Fair Renting Campaign. Many people are not able to rent a home in this city because we're being discriminated against. For those on lower wages or benefits, between landlords refusing to rent to us and out-of-control rents, we're running out of options. I spent a year trying to find a home but was turned down over and over again because I was receiving benefits. I felt that I was not worthy of a home and I was fearful of becoming homeless. Last year, 34% of private renting households in Bristol were claiming housing benefits. So benefits discrimination is a potential issue for at least 45,000 people in our city. Courts have ruled that benefits discrimination is unlawful, but it's still widespread and impacting black and minority ethnic communities, single parents and people with disabilities the most. We need the council to protect renters and for these harmful practices to be exposed and stopped. Today, councillors, we ask you to take one action to improve the lives of renters, vote in favour of the Golden Motion and protect our communities. Thank you.
Apologies. Thank you very much to everyone who's spoken on statements. We're now going to move on to public questions. We have received 30 questions, which are being displayed on the screen, from 19 different people, of whom I think 11 have told us they intend to be here. So we'll run through the questions in the order that they were received, and we'll try and get as many in as we possibly can in the time that we have available, but it may be that we don't get time to cover all of those questions. When I call upon you, please read out your question, but to help us with the timing, if you could leave out explanatory text and just go to the nub of your question, that will help us get more people in. The Mayor will then respond to your question and you'll have the opportunity for a supplementary or follow-up question if you would like it. So the first questions 1 and 2 from Paul Collins on the proposal to close Kingsdown Sports Centre. Paul, if you could ask your first question to the Mayor, please.
Thank you. What proportion of the current membership of Kingsdown Sports Centre live in the 3 most deprived areas, as described in the deprivation and inactivity map included in the draft leisure investment options strategy?
0.
And secondly, can the Council confirm what proportion of the membership of Horfield Leisure Centre live in the 3 most deprived areas as described in the same document?
0.
Okay, would you like to ask any supplementary or follow-up questions to that, Paul? You have the opportunity. It's up to you if you'd like to or not.
Not at this stage.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much indeed. We'll then turn to public question number 3 and Devereux on predicted flooding at Baltic Wharf. Thank you, Anne. If you could ask your question first of all, please.
Why are planning applications allowed on the harbour side when Bristol has not built any flood defences?
The work on the flood strategy for the city is progressing right now, the Bristol Avon flood strategy. I actually met with Dan Norris, Toby Savage from South Gloss and Kevin, leader of Baines, on Friday. We all met and agreed on the importance of the commitment to delivering on the major infrastructure in Bristol alone. It's about 200 million. But we need to press ahead with the processes and the whole rigor around bringing developments forward will be vetted by this organisation, by the Environment Agency. So nothing that breaches those standards we'll be able to go ahead. But nonetheless, we need to know what we want to get done in the city, and we need to have a sense of the direction that we're going in. We just had someone talk today about the renters' crisis in Bristol. Tackling that renting crisis will not just be about making statements about rent. As long as there aren't enough homes for people, and there will always be a challenge around people being able to afford to live here, we must deliver the homes people in Bristol need. The more we hold them up, the more it will be impossible to take on the crisis. It's just been raised with us by that statement.
But not delay the...
Sorry, Anne, can you just hold the microphone up so people at home won't be able to hear you otherwise?
Right, sorry. Why not, I concur with what you're saying, but why not delay the planning applications when people's lives and livelihoods would be in jeopardy if or when the flooding will happen? Because, even with the cladding crisis, high-rise in Bristol right now people are losing, possibility of them losing their livelihoods, their homes. It's happening now. And
some people...
floods already happened in Bristol and around the harbour.
Well, and
people's
Anne, thank you. I think you've asked the question,
Sorry.
so we'll let the Mayor answer it. Thank you.
Well, it's worth remembering some people don't have homes in Bristol. We have 16,000 people on the waiting list. I'm going to be saying this again because I know there's a bit of an organised effort today. 16,000 people on the waiting list. 1 in 4 children are living in poverty. COVID has only worsened those numbers. Bristol is about 460,000 people today. We're going to be 550,000 by 2050. The housing crisis we have now, if we start talking about delay and not do and not deliver, I mean, beggars, it should send chills down the spine to think about what's going to be happening to our housing crisis if we are not delivering. The planning process itself will test any application to deliver homes, and it will test them, against their resilience to flood. At the same time, the work on putting the flood defences in place is an absolute priority for us, our neighbours, and the Combined Authority. We've had Harbour Leeds connecting with North Somerset, South Gloucestershire and Baines to talk about and to plan for the comprehensive flood defence the whole west of England needs. And it's a priority we've brought with government. We've been sharing with the Combined Authority Mayor and with government that good flood defence protects tens of thousands of homes, but unlocks about 13,000 homes within Bristol as well. So we are putting this front and centre. But in the face of a housing crisis, if we start talking about delay and not do on delivering homes when they can be delivered in a way that meets the standards required, is frankly irresponsible and will really undermine the quality of life of those thousands of Bristolians who need homes.
Thank you very much. We move to public question number 4 from Susan Sadie Hackett on plans for social housing in Bristol.
Hi there.
Hi, Susan. Thank you.
Okay, well, my question now follows on quite conveniently, you could say, from the previous one, and also from what was said by one of the councillors. I can see the gentleman down there. To reiterate what you just said, Marvin, 16,000 people on the housing waiting list, which is extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, that's scary. And so my question to you is, if I can just add a little bit more, and that is to say...
If you could just ask the question, because we've got a lot of people after you wanting to get in.
but I need to put it into context. So what and where are the plans being made specifically for social housing in Bristol? And I don't mean by that affordable housing, because affordable, as anybody who looks into it knows, affordable is not affordable. And just to add to this, now this morning I read in the Bristol Cable, Bristol City Council, Marvin, apparently you issued this statement, I think, last Monday, £250 million commitment from Bristol City Council to build homes via Gorham Homes. And I think I must have this number mistaken, of which 2,069 are council homes planned over 7 years, which doesn't seem right. So my question is, social housing, given that there's such a huge number of people on the housing waiting list, I mean, certainly, I'm going to say this. I was born and brought up in a council estate.
Susan, you've asked your question. We need to let the Mayor answer it, because there are a lot of people who also want to ask other questions. Okay. So we do need to give them time. Thank you. Yeah, fine, Councillor Bernard. Go ahead.
What I'd say to this one is we've just published the Cabinet papers around what we're proposing to do around investing in council homes, which went live last night. It proposes to invest £1.8 billion in delivering council homes over the next 30 years, which will be at least 9,000 new council homes. The 2,069 figure is over the next 7 years and is a far accelerated approach than has been proposed previously. So it's one of the most ambitious plans for council homes in the country, what we've developed and proposed. As I say, details in the Cabinet papers. Obviously, it's not going to be the only social housing delivered, because housing associations also deliver housing as part of the Affordable Homes Grant that's been given out by Homes England. So there'll be a lot of work happening to ensure we're delivering what people need in the coming years. And the schemes for the council homes for the next 7 years are all listed as part of the appendices in that Cabinet report. So the full detail will be there.
Thank you. Susan, would you like to ask a supplementary question?
I'll try and be quick, okay?
Just please.
And that is that, okay, what I've heard you saying is that, you know, that what you've just said, and it might be the biggest and most ambitious in the country. I don't know what other needs there are in other cities in the UK, but given that there is a clear distinction between sociable council houses and affordable housing, and when we've got sites like we all know, Baltic Wharf, with a predominance of so-called affordable housing at the expense of our precious environment. Why are we not? Have you heard of the abolish empty office buildings? You know, is the council working with the AEOB, who basically this organisation recognises the importance of using defunct buildings in Bristol, so genuine brownfield sites, to build council houses at affordable rents? Thank you.
Thank you.
So, if you read the Cabinet papers, as well as listing the sites, it also says what the breakdown is in terms of social rented and shared ownership. The vast majority of that 2,069 will be social rent. When this administration talks about affordable housing, we're talking about social rented, shared ownership and affordable rent. Affordable rent being at local housing allowance or below. So, you know, we're always clear that we'll focus on social rent as a priority, and that's what these plans will do.
Thank you very much. We'll move now to public question number 5 from Anita Bennett on St Christopher's School. Anita, if you could please just ask your initial question to start with, please.
Thanks very much. I'd like to know precisely what alternative residential and special school education plans there are to replace St. Christopher's. We could be very solution focused and actually look at this more carefully, because when I spoke to them this morning, they seemed to have no idea where there was going to be alternative placements. They mentioned an officer named James Anderson. So could we please have something very, very specific? We could avoid getting into court, breaking the law, by actually answering this question: where are these children going to go? And who's going to make certain that we are no longer wasting millions of pounds sending children out of this city?
Yeah, so we appreciate the work of St Christopher's over the years, and how keenly the loss will be felt by families who've benefited from the service there. So it was just in 2020 that we committed £500,000 to fund the children's homes for disabled children, so they can stay in the city and continue in their school and stay close to the family and friends. And the Disabled Children's Service in Social Care are currently working with developers on that provision. But we're working across the city with existing schools and trusts in the meantime to increase the number of high quality and sustainable specialist places for Bristol's young people. I'm happy to talk with Councillor Asher Craig and to make a connection with the officers doing that work and the parents who have concerns. But this does include phase 3 of the joint programme with City of Bristol College to expand weekday supported accommodation for students with special needs, which is an accommodation and a service I visited a couple of times now and met the residents there. It's worth bearing in mind, though, just to avoid misunderstanding, that St Christopher's Special School was an independent, non-maintained setting. The council doesn't hold the freehold or a lease on the land or have any control over the land. But what we are doing is what we can in the meantime to make sure that our children and young people are supported.
Thank you. Would you like to ask a follow-up question to that one?
Yes, thank you very much. Interesting information. I'd like to just clarify, Marvin, that this was a school that was bought and paid for by a lot of family money and by a lot of government money. So while it's true it wasn't a state school, we now have an amazing opportunity. If we were to declare it as a community asset, we could then buy it back at cost, and we could save a lot of money, because the supported accommodation is not the same as fully residential. Many of these high needs children need 2-to-1, 3-to-1. We're not just talking about kids who are going to college. This is something we really could be looking at together with planning, together with education. This is not just any institution, and it is a great asset that we, through the planning process, could actually look at refusing planning, because these are going to be wealthy people up there in houses specially designed for our children.
Okay. Okay, can you just be clear, Anita, what the specific question is that you'd like to ask the Mayor?
Would you all be willing to have a meeting with some of us from ResCare and other families around this specific question? Could we do that? Would that be possible to have a roundtable discussion?
I'm not sure what the specific question was.
The question is whether we can have a meeting to discuss cross-party and so it's both residential as well as educational. We'd like to have a conversation, roundtable, about the future of St. Christopher's with the relevant officers and the elected councillors.
Well, I'm sure that wouldn't be a problem.
Would that be okay? Would you be willing to convene it?
Well, I think the more important thing is to talk to officers and maybe Asher, but we certainly could have a meeting with officers. That wouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
it'd be
you.
fine.
Thank you. So, Anita, you also have public question number 6 on a separate subject on Spike Island. So we'll come to that one. Would you like to ask that question to the Mayor? And okay, fair enough. In which case, we will move on to public question number 7, which I think is going to be put by Siobhan Kivens, is it? Kieran's, apologies. on allocation of open space. This is number 7.
So, according to the Urban Living Supplementary Planning Document, Growth and Regeneration, there is requirements for housing developments to provide a minimum allocation of open space on site. The SPD provides calculations to estimate the likely occupation of a development based on details provided in the planning application. Please, can you tell us what plans the council have to provide outside open playing space for children who would be living in this proposed new Baltic Wharf Gorham Homes development? Thank you.
So it's fantastic to have so much interest in the Gorham Homes Baltic Wharf development, and I'm sure it's a recognition of the importance, the critical importance in Bristol of delivering affordable homes in central sites, so that not only are we providing homes and good quality homes, but we're building those homes in places where people won't need cars because they'll be able to walk to the main centres of employment, entertainment, and education and retail, which will also minimise the carbon price the planet pays for us meeting the needs of a growing population. And we'd be happy to share it with you, a full report on the planning application, which will include all the details of the extent to which the application meets policy requirements, such as on open spaces and play spaces, will be presented to the Development Control Committee in the very near future. We'd be but that document will be made public, and we'd be incredibly happy to share it with you for your insight and input.
Sorry. We have time for just one more question. So what I'm going to do is go on to question number 8, just to bring other people in. So question 8 is Helen Powell on the Public Rights of Way Committee. So we've got time for one question, Helen, so pick one of your two.
So thank you. So I'll pick question 8. Please, could you clarify how officers are progressing all relevant public right-of-way applications and investigations as soon as reasonably practical, and with a view to ensuring that no rights of access are at risk of being lost if the 1st of January 2026 deadline to register new public rights-of-way is brought into effect?
So we had a question earlier on about councillor roles. I mean, the Public Rights of Way and Greens Committee is part of the council's non-executive functions, and as such, it's not in my powers. All the powers with this are in the hands of the councillors who sit on that. The chair of the committee is Green Councillor Tessa Fitzjohn. It's up to that chair to convene the committee, to call meetings, to run the business, and my suggestion is that you write directly to her. It's not in my powers.
You can do a follow-up to that question.
Thank you. Okay, so within the queue for public rights of way applications and registrations, there are several applications in relation to Stoke Lodge. They're stuck in the queue, and the fence I referred to earlier is blocking those historic routes and also having a really severe and discriminatory impact on access to the fields. Councillor Craig kindly came to see the fence for herself last year. 2 years ago, I invited you to come and try the Stoke Lodge version of Tough Mudder for yourself, and that invitation still stands. Please, would you come and see for yourself the impact of allowing Cottam to privatise this publicly owned land?
Yeah, I'm going to be. I raised with a councillor earlier on just about being careful of language. I understand that because it's we the arguments have been going on. I understand that good things can have negative consequences for some people in both directions. I wouldn't call a playing field going to a school in the city that serves a very diverse range of pupils privatisation, in the same way that we might refer to the more negative aspect and group it in with the more negative kind of features of privatisation we've seen in some other industries. I don't think that does the debate any justice. But that as and when time allows, I'll be more than happy. I've done a Tough Mudder myself. I'll be happy to do another one, find out how rigorous it is. Yeah, that would be fine. But I've said many times on this discussion before, and this is not a point about you, this is a point about everyone involved. This is a very tricky issue and there's no clean outs. But it's really important that the way we all engage in this debate sets an example to our children of how you engage in challenging debates in very challenging circumstances in complex issues. And sometimes the debate has fallen short of that need, and that's been unfortunate. But I'd be really happy to come and visit.
Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of the time that we have, in fact, slightly beyond the time that we have available for public forum questions. So apologies to those that we haven't been able to get in. We just had more questions than we're able to fit in the time, but you will get a written response if you've not had the opportunity to ask your question verbally. Agenda item 7 is petitions notified by councillors, and we have none at this meeting. So we move straight to agenda item 8, the petition debate. So this is a public petition which has reached the threshold of 3,500 signatures to qualify for a debate here in full council. And 20 minutes of the meeting today is allocated for that debate. So the petition organiser will have up to 5 minutes to present the petition, and we will then proceed to a councillor debate. And finally, I will ask the Mayor or relevant Cabinet member to respond at the end. And I should stress this, once the debate has been introduced, it is a councillor debate and it is not an interactive debate involving members of the public. So the petition organiser is Anita Bennett. So Anita, would you have the microphone? You will have 5 minutes to present your petition to us. Thank you.
We're going to share this slot. I want to thank everyone who helped to bring the city together around this petition, including the Democratic Services. We're asking for a vote on it today, if possible, to support Richard Eddy's landmark cross-party motion to save green spaces. If this becomes policy, then Bristol will lead the country in protecting greenfield sites from damaging developments. Why a clear policy now? Because our council officials and developers have suddenly begun to mislabel sites with high green ecological value as so-called brownfield. Bristol is flying in the face of government legal NPPR definition. We have a great opportunity today to rescue our tarnishing reputation and give our children and grandchildren a legacy to be proud of. We have photos here as well if people want to hold them up. This bad behavior is misleading and it deliberately undermines the cross-party motion. If we adopt this, the correct NPPR definition, we can set a good example, especially at the zoological gardens at Clifton Zoo and Baltic Wharf, from desecration from overdevelopment. To be clear, we support building on genuine brownfield sites. Many brownfield sites are fast becoming available because the city centre offices and shops lie abandoned. Why ever did Gorham Homes not make a proposal to the Castle Park to build buildings there instead of destroying 101 Baltic Wharf trees? Do we seriously need more offices in the centre, dear Marvin? We will be demonstrating honesty and integrity with this policy adoption, because there will no longer be any need to destroy our valuable trees and green spaces. When they're gone forever. Out in the freezing rain, on the streets and on the harbour side, we have experienced the most amazing, overwhelming, emotional support you can imagine from all of Bristol. It was our best Christmas ever. All that's required is to make this into permanent planning policy. I'm now handing this over to a man much more clever than I am, Professor John Charlton of the Bristol Tree Forum. We have him to thank for saving a lot of people's lives around the Maples.
Thank you very much. I was going to talk about the definition of brownfield sites. The term brownfield is used to describe previously developed land. In planning law, the National Planning Policy Framework defines this as land which is or was occupied by a permanent structure and any associated fixed surface infrastructure, such as foundations. The definition specifically excludes land in built-up areas such as residential gardens. So a brownfield site is not one on which there has been just any development. Under the Town and Country Planning Act, there is also a statutory requirement for local authorities to maintain an up-to-date register of brownfield sites that they consider appropriate for residential development. This must be reviewed at least once a year. The Town and County Planning Act also addresses the situation where a fragment of the site might be considered brownfield, but other parts are greenfield. It says greenfield land is not appropriate for inclusion, and where it is unclear whether the whole site is previously developed land, only the brownfield part of the site should be included. Recently, many sites have been inappropriately described as brownfield, contrary to the legal definition. For instance, only 2.6% of the Baltic Wharf Caravan Park is occupied by a permanent structure, whereas the 100 trees on the site cover over 30% of its area. Thus, fully 97.4% of this site should be classified as greenfield. As much of the site is maintained as a residential garden, it is indeed exempt from the MPPF definition. Also, this site is absent from the register of brownfield sites. This is not simply about the definition, it is the underlying principle that is most important. The term brownfield is shorthand for a site of little or no ecological or amenity value. Therefore, sites that provide substantial ecological services and particularly climate change resilience, particularly in a vulnerable urban environment, should never be regarded as brownfield. Again, the Baltic Wharf site, with the tree cover and large areas of grass, exceeds the ecological value of a typical grass-covered urban park of equal size. Only those wanting to mislead would describe this as brownfield. The same applies to other sites described as brownfield, such as Clanage Road, Bedminster Green and Bristol Zoological Gardens, all of which have considerable ecological and amenity value. Thank you. I'll pass over to the next.
Thank you. You've got about 15 seconds out of your 5 minutes.
We all recognise the value of green spaces, and particularly trees, in absorbing pollution, preventing flooding, reducing traffic noise. Both physical and mental health are improved when nature is incorporated into residential areas. Urban trees and green spaces are islands of biodiversity and essential in connecting wider ecosystems. Without them, the Ecological Emergency Action Plan will fail. Trees are vital in sequestering carbon, with a group of 100 trees absorbing tons of carbon each year.
Okay.
Trees and green
Can you
space...
wind up now, please?
Oh, this is so unfortunate. Put simply, without trees and green spaces, the inner city is likely to be devoid of wildlife and incompatible with healthy living within the lifetime of our children. The homes we are building now will be occupied only by those vulnerable communities lacking the wealth to move elsewhere.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We'll now move to a councillor debate on the petition, and I call Councillor Beach to speak on behalf of the Labour Party. Councillor Beach, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you genuinely to the petitioners for bringing this to Council. It is a really important part of what goes on in this chamber. I'm responding to the petition on behalf of the Labour Group, and I understand the sentiment here, but I'm afraid, if you'll pardon the pun, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. There are two things here that matter. What is brownfield land and what is the Brownfield Register? The definition, John, you're right, and we know each other pretty well now, is previously developed land. There are some exceptions. Things like mining areas that are now managed, or urban parks. But generally, this has to be a land which has had in the past has been agriculture or pasture land or nature-based land use outside of cities. Consequently, much of the land that makes up the centre of Bristol and most major cities is brownfield. Baltic Wharf Caravan Site is brownfield land. There's no ifs, there's no buts, and there's no maybes. It matters what is on the ground. This isn't a field which hosts some caravans. It's a car park which homed caravans and lots of trees, you are correct. But trees do not mean the site is not brownfield. For 100 years before that, the site was a timber yard. It's hard to imagine anywhere in the harbour that has not had an industrial past. So why isn't Baltic Wharf on the register? This is because as of March 2020, planning permission was not granted, and it also is not in the 2011 local plan. That is why it is not on the Brownfield Register. It doesn't have to be on the Brownfield Register to be developed or to be classed as brownfield. Now before, begrudgingly, I quoted Cameron, as it was under his government that the idea of a Brownfield Register was first launched, headed a new register to unlock brownfield land for thousands of homes. This is a fast track, a list of places that developers could review, assess and understand if they would bring them forward for development. It's not an exhaustive list. There's 249 sites currently on our register, and many of these sites now house the front doors of the thousands of Bristolians that we have homed in our administration. Housing is a key pillar of our commitment to Bristol, and so is ecology. Our manifesto has committed to deliver a new plan for green spaces and our allotments, to put biodiversity at the heart of planning, to wean our city off pesticides, to invest in biodiversity and rewilding, and to dedicate 30% of the council's land to nature. Goreham's plans for Baltic Wharf include a 33% increase in biodiversity habitat, bat boxes, nesting boxes for swallows and swifts, green and brown roofs, and semi-mature trees to give a greater ecological diversity and value. Our housing and environmental commitments set a context for one another. We need homes and we need to protect and enhance our green spaces. I'm just going to end by speaking as a ward councillor for a ward in the highest 10% deprivation. If the tone of this debate tonight does not bring homes and ecology to the forefront, then this chamber for me is lost to privilege. And that makes me really fearful for our future. These two things are not mutually exclusive. We can and we are doing both of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll now call Councillor O'Rourke to speak on behalf of the Green Group. Councillor O'Rourke, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I think I'm having a problem with my iPad. This never happened to me before. Don't start the clock. It's getting upset because I keep putting the mask on and it's face recognition. And now it's not doing anything. Oh no.
Do you want to...
No.
Are you ready to go?
I don't know why it just won't open.
Okay, do you want me to come back to you?
Would you mind awfully?
No,
I'm so
no
sorry.
problem at all. In which case, I'm going to put Councillor Eddy on the spot. I'll call Councillor Eddy to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group. Councillor Eddy, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This I very much welcomes this Brownfield motion we've received today, not only for what it says, but for what it symbolises. For years I've been troubled by the increasing cleft between the political class and the people we claim to represent. Far too many politicians, in my view, of whatever party, go from university to working in an MP's office or becoming a ministerial advisor before landing a permanent position, climbing the greasy pole. With respect, they have never done what many would claim a real job in their life, and their experience of the issues which afflict real people is therefore narrow and distinctly untypical. Lord Mayor, I was minded when composing this speech to refer to the favourite expression of former Labour leader Graham Robertson, a real job of work, he would say in a real Bristol accent. But I record probably only Helen Holland, and I recall him now from the 90s. Lord Mayor, I believe the Green Space motion, which I proposed in this chamber in September and was carried by councillors from 3 of the 4 parties, was a case in point of reconnecting with the abiding concerns of Bristolians. I do not think the majority of Bristolians are NIMBYs, and I certainly am not. And of course, housing and redevelopment needs to be encouraged in this city. However, rightly, we argue that brownfield sites should invariably be prioritised for development, and our precious green spaces should only be looked at if and when the supply of development land was exhausted, rather than to assuage the lust of developers for profit. The petition we have today is brief and well argued. It asks us to use the nationally agreed definition of brownfield land. All it asks is that this mayor administration uses the national definition. So Brownfield site means what it says on the can. In September, Labour councillor shamefully failed to support my green space motion and spoke against the interests of Bristolians. Please don't do the same today.
Yes, sorry for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Rourke.
Thank you to the petitioners for bringing this petition, and the number of people who supported it is clear evidence that there is concern, I think, about the way the city is being developed, and I can see why you focused on the brownfield sites aspect of it, but I think there are broader issues. We are being asked to perform a difficult balancing act. We need to provide the homes that we need while preserving the heritage of Bristol and at the same time protecting open spaces and dealing with the environmental pressures that we're under. We want people to live and work where they can have access to jobs and amenities that are here in the city. But at the same time, we want to avoid urban sprawl and we want to preserve the tree canopy. So it does mean some compromise. What is needed and what seemingly is lacking is faith in the decision makers who need to oversee the development of the city. The last two words of the petition were the ones that rang loudest to me, and that was talk of destructive development. I think that's what people are concerned about. Slowly, over the past few years, there's been a growing fear that developments are being approved that are destructive, too high, too overbearing, too corporate, too bland, not unique enough, and not unique in a creative way, which is the way that Bristol sees itself. So we acknowledge the limitations of the national planning framework, and we acknowledge that there is good work being done at the cross-party level where people are working together on the local plan with efforts to beef up the powers that the city has to develop the city in a way that we want to, and how the council could shape it. But that's all going to take time. That's not going to be in place for another year or two. And in the meanwhile, one of the things that concerns me is we do have what's called practice notes, and they've been referred to here in the debate today. Things about the climate and sustainability practice note. Notes like that could be given a great deal of weight to perhaps influence how we develop things. And, you know, I'm concerned that they are not given enough weight. One question that I think that I think is absolutely certain is the way people feel about the way that city design and planning is being run. I think there used to be a cabinet position held by, well, it was Nicola Beach's in the last administration, and now the mayor has that position himself. And I think that that's part of the problem that we have here today. There's not going to be a debate, there's not going to be a vote on this, but I think one of the things that could be a useful outcome of this debate today is to appeal to the mayor to consider appointing a councillor in the cabinet role for planning and city design, because we have a lot of power in one person, and I think that's part of the issue. We have a lot of power tied up in the executive, and we have power tied up in that one person making that decision. So that's what I would ask for as an outcome of today's debate, is that is considered, and the mayor will have an opportunity to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Councillor Varney to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrat Group. Councillor, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I would like to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrat Group. Firstly, I'd like to start by congratulating Anita, Jill and John and the team for getting this debate today. I know from first-hand experience that getting 5,306 signatures from Bristol residents is no mean feat, so well done for all your hard work. As Councillor O'Rourke said, it is clearly an issue that people feel very strongly about. I think many of the points I wanted to express have already been made by other speakers, but I'd just like to state the following. The Liberal Democrats are keenly aware of the need to build more homes in Bristol, especially new social housing. And of course, we share the petitioners' desire to build on genuine brownfield sites, with a priority for sites where embodied carbon can be preserved by retrofitting older commercial buildings to make them into homes. While we need to build more homes in Bristol, we must also remember our other commitments to achieving net zero by 2030 and to doubling tree canopy cover by 2045, which I'll be talking more about later. We must also remember that some areas of the city have vastly lower levels of tree coverage and green space than others, with Hotwells and Harbourside having one of the lowest rates with just 7% open green space compared to a citywide average of 18%. The administration will of course point out the need for social homes, which we support, but unfortunately the development of the Baltic Wharf site will only add 16 new social homes to the stock under current proposals. Unfortunately, there is currently too much ambiguity in the classification of sites in Bristol, which allows sites that are largely green space to be classified as brownfield, contrary to national guidance. Only by tightening the use of the language used can we create a constructive debate for members and the public to engage with. We agree with the petitioners that sites should not be described by any council official or member as brownfield unless it is officially on the brownfield register. So we would ask the administration to commit extra resources to the planning department to make sure this register is up to date and genuinely reflects the sites of Bristol. We must also, of course, make an extreme effort to protect Bristol's mature trees, especially in the city centre, where they have a multitude of environmental and health benefits. While tree replacement schemes are in place, all too often there is a lack of nearby sites, and it takes many years for young trees to match the mature trees they replace in terms of benefits. The Liberal Democrats hope that the administration takes on the point of this debate, that it is not a NIMBY issue, but one of making sure language used reflects current policy. We also hope that councillors working together on the latest local plan will reflect on the need to preserve green space in our city centre areas. Thank you.
Lord Mayor, could I just make, sorry, it's Councillor Beach, could I just make a point of order? Is there any...
Yeah, you can.
I appreciate Councillor Varney most likely wrote that speech ahead of this debate, and I've got a lot of empathy for that. But just as a point of order about what the administration's power is to or not include something on the Brownfield register, one of the critical points is that planning consent is granted. And so I just want to make that point of order here, because I listened carefully to what you said then, Andrew, but there's a factual error as part of that. And so it's not something the administration could sign up to in lieu of the fact that consent is not granted at Baltic Wharf.
Thank you very much. Point taken. And I'll now call Councillor Hopkins to speak on behalf of the Knoll Community Party. Councillor Hopkins, you have 3 minutes.
I welcome this petition, and it's a very important one. I think what happens when we have a position where there's a focus from just one person and one policy is that everything else gets swept aside. And all we're hearing about is building more housing units. And frankly, I think this slogan that we used to operate under some years ago, which was balanced and sustainable communities, was a far better reflection of what would be right for Bristol. And now we're in serious danger of all the, as has been said, of all the edges being blurred, definitions being twisted, just to fit what is required in terms of numbers of houses. Incidentally, some 15 years ago, more affordable homes were provided then than have been provided over the last few years, despite the focus apparently in one direction. It does Bristol no good at all to be focusing just on volume of building. And in some cases, as has been said, we're actually not even getting housing, we're getting more office blocks being squeezed in. And what do more office blocks need? Oh, yes, they need more people to be squeezed in. And frankly, the city needs to take a deep breath and think, is this the right direction or not? I would hope that those members on Planning Committee can look at each development proposal as it comes through. But I also understand the pressure that they're actually under, because if there's a recommendation coming, oh, we need to approve this, and central government might override, if there's a refusal to grant the planning permission, that's a huge amount of pressure on those councillors who sat on those committees. So I think collectively we need a rethink, and we need to put together the various strands that are represented in this council now for everybody to work together for a common cause, and not just to charge down the line of more housing units, wherever they might be. So thank you for bringing this. We certainly support it, and we need to, I think you're gathering the impression that we have a lot of friends here, and you have a lot of friends here, who want to change the direction of the way that this city is actually going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that concludes the councillor debate. Mary, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you. Just a few things. I mean, one is there is a context to this, and we keep emphasising, the context that we have a housing crisis, all the other social challenges we face that exist around that. Many of those social challenges are not really represented in the chamber, which is one of the drives of making sure that we make up for the democratic deficit in terms of demographic profile of our councillors. We have to meet that challenge in the face of a climate and ecological emergency, so the planet doesn't pay a disproportionate price for us meeting the needs of our population. One of those needs is housing. Recent World Bank paper, pancakes or pyramids. What do? Right? Someone did mention it. There is no option to meeting the housing needs of our population. We can sprawl and go out, or we can build in densely and up. Right? There's no more land coming. This is the land we've got, and we need to use that land to meet the needs, of our population, and that is our challenge. I think what I heard, lots of concerns, right? And to be perfectly frank, I think sometimes people are saying things they think people want to hear. I'm concerned about this. I'm concerned about that. Well, we're all concerned about stuff. Where's the solution, right? So we can all talk about brownfield sites and not going greenfield sites. I didn't hear one site mentioned apart from Baltic Wharf, and that's about not doing it. No one mentioned any other sites. I'll name a few sites. Temple Island, 550 homes in the middle of the city. Gateway to Temple Quarter, 11,000 homes. No one's talked about that. The zoo car park. It's a slap of grit and tarmac, and yet it was opposed for housing delivery in the middle, of the city. Castle Park View, old ambulance site, not supported. I've not heard anyone really come and speak about where they supported houses being delivered. It's fine to qualify your intervention today by saying, well, of course I support housing delivery, but houses don't exist in an abstract. At some point you have to talk about where they're going to go. And at some point you have to confront the challenges of a complex world in which we are taking on the ecological crisis, but the ecological strategy is not an anti-development document. It just means we have to do development in the right way that supports biodiversity and supports the recovery of nature. No one's talked about the arena, right? In fact, building an arena in an existing building with all that embodied carbon was the most environmentally friendly way of delivering an arena while releasing land for homes in the middle of the city. People wouldn't live in an arena. And for those of you that still support the arena, we'd have been trying to open it in the middle of the pandemic, would have been financially catastrophic for the city anyway. So listing concerns is great. But surely this chamber is not just about telling us what you're concerned about. It's about putting solution on the table. Otherwise, why do we bother getting elected? So that's the challenge. I can line up 2,000 people with concerns, but what we need is solutions. The world isn't waiting, it's moving on. The housing crisis is getting worse, the climate emergency is getting worse, the ecological crisis is getting worse. If you just want to say you're concerned about it, fantastic. You can have a room down the corner, you can all go in there and moan about it. But we need solutions. Bristol people need solutions. And ultimately, planning decisions, you're talking about me, planning decisions are going to be with planning committee. So as councillors, you will get the decision. You will get the opportunity to make the decisions over the complex challenges of these sites. And you have to start owning that power, owning that decision-making position to the general public, rather than keep saying you have no power. You are on the planning committees.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, that concludes the debate. I'll ask Council to note the issues raised in the petition and comments made during the debate. This will all be referred to the Mayor and relevant Cabinet Member for consideration and for a response to be issued. So we move to agenda item 9, which is political proportionality and allocation of committee seats. I move this report, which was published as a supplement to the agenda last Thursday, 6th of January. This essentially outlines changes to committee seats on committees following the establishment of the new political group, the Knoll Community Party. And incidentally, as I haven't said it so far, I welcome the new group to the Chamber. I'll call Councillor Varney as Deputy Lord Mayor to second the report.
I rise the second report, reserving my remarks.
Thank you very much. There is no debate on this item, so we move straight to the vote. The recommendation is that full council review and approve the allocation of seats on those committees. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you. Then that concludes agenda item 9. Agenda item 10, along similar lines, is the appointment of Chair of the Audit Committee. Again, I will move the report, which was published as a supplement last Thursday, that the Chair of Audit Committee moves from Councillor Gary Hopkins to Councillor Andrew Brown. And again, I'll call Councillor Varney as Deputy Lord Mayor to second that report.
I rise to second this report, reserving my remarks.
Thank you very much. So, again, there's no debate on this item. The recommendation is that Councillor Andrew Brown be appointed as Chair of the Audit Committee. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Good. Then that is carried, and that concludes item number 10. Agenda item 11 is the council tax base for 2022-23. I'll call Councillor Craig Cheney to move the report. Councillor Cheney, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. This report recommends for approval the council tax base for the next financial year. It sets out the number of properties that are forecast to pay council tax next year after taking into account those who aren't required to pay. This includes households that are exempt or receive discounts to their council tax bills under national rules, such as students and single occupiers. In addition, we are continuing to help over 36,000 low-income households through our local council tax reduction scheme. Normally, we would reduce the tax base by 1.5% to reflect the amount of debt that will not be collected once all the recovery measures have been taken. After careful analysis for 22-23, we are increasing estimated in-year losses to 3% as a one-off, with the anticipation of a tapered recovery moving forward. Due to healthy growth in the number of new properties, this has a minimal effect of reducing the tax base by 0.02% compared with 21-22. I recommend this report to full council today.
Thank you very much. And I'll call Councillor Rippington to second the report. Councillor Rippington.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm happy to second this motion and will keep my remarks brief. Firstly, I'd again like to thank officers for the detailed briefings that have been given to us as part of the Resources Scrutiny Task and Finish Group. We've all sat and listened to the same information, so we all know how difficult the current situation is. I'd just like to highlight that the report makes it clear the loss of income that we have suffered as a council due to more people claiming council tax reduction as a result of the pandemic, less housing coming online as a result of the pandemic, and higher levels of debt from council taxpayers due to the pandemic. We know that without the pandemic, our finances would have been in a much stronger position. Unfortunately, we are where we are, and we have not received enough funding from government to make up the gap in funding caused by these losses, and the budget discussions have been very difficult as a result. I second the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so I call Councillor Mack to speak on behalf of the Green Group. Councillor Mack, you have 3 minutes.
Oh, now mine's messing up. I will also be brief. Thank you, Lord Mayor, and to Councillor Trini and all the finance officers also on resources and budget scrutiny. And I've been really impressed with the openness and the commitment to scrutiny in this process. Difficult decisions have had to be made, and we are facing a huge funding gap of 19 million. Yet I'm glad we are still offering the council tax reduction scheme. Sometimes we need to look at who would be impacted, and if we didn't have this method, how would we reach those people? If we looked at ending the full council tax reduction scheme, I would be really concerned how we would identify and reach many of the people in need, much as we have seen people fall through other gaps in benefits. We are facing a funding cut, partially due to a reduction in the council tax base. So we need to continue to lobby national government and support local authorities to fund our necessary services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Councillor Gollop to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As has been said already, this is a technical report, so we have no option but as a group to support it because we recognise the incredible level of work and detail that has gone into producing it. A couple of personal points, however. One is I find it confusing that a report, and this is not critical of officers, it's critical of the system that requires us to produce this, that we have a report that's meant to be about the number of properties. But in fact, we have to include within that calculations relating to the council tax reduction scheme and bad debt collection. That distorts the actual information that should be being presented. What the underlying figures show is a 2,000 increase roughly in the number of Band D properties. There is a wider question that I think this chamber needs to consider in the future. We are giving planning permission for more and more council accommodation, for student accommodation, which doesn't produce any council tax contribution. We've heard in the debates today about the need for key worker housing and affordable housing and social housing, and we are not generating those either. So actually, what this shows us is that in a time of severe housing need, the number of units available on which council tax is being paid is not going up. And I urge the executive and I urge members to really consider this is not right. First of all, on the fact that we have people who need housing, and secondly, it's not right as a business model because we need to be generating more council tax. We can't increase the percentage. We need to increase the number of properties. So we need to be finding ways to achieve that. So my comments, Lord Mayor, therefore, are that what this shows is that we are failing to generate housing at the end of the housing market where we need it, and that's a collective problem that we all together have to work out how we can redress. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much. I now call Councillor Brown to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrat Group.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I would like again to thank officers for their time and expertise given to the Budget Task and Finish Group when developing the budget. As a new member of this chamber and as a member of the Resources Scrutiny until a few minutes ago, this is invaluable. There is no denying that there have been huge challenges facing the Council, partly as a result of the pandemic, but partly as a result of the way Bristol is developing and the whole operation of local government finance. For example, the growth in the universities, which has its benefits, but it also has its costs, as this report makes clear. Unfortunately, the financial benefits of having universities in our city don't generally come back to the council, but the costs in terms of lost council tax and the cost of services or the value of services provided very much do. With almost 9,000 Band D equivalents, this equates to £16.5 million for which Bristol receives no compensation, and that's a fault in the system, as well as a product of the fact that the universities have been growing year on year on year. Further, the disproportionate number of properties in bands A and B means that Bristol gets less benefit than other authorities when applying the social care levy. For every percentage we increase the council tax, we get less compared to other authorities. So one of the few things that's likely to unite this chamber, I think, is a desire to see a fairer, clearer and more stable funding mechanism for the city so that we know year on year, so that budgeting is easier year on year. We welcome the continued fully funded approach to the council tax reduction scheme, which helps protect the most vulnerable in our society, and the past couple of years have demonstrated the importance of that. However, as a group, we are concerned that the approach taken to allowing for losses on collection is more cautious than it needs to be, understating the council tax base and therefore distorting the size of the funding gap, leading to deeper cuts this year, potentially leading to deeper cuts this year than may otherwise have been necessary. Compared to the previous methodology employed, this amounts to £3.7 million. So COVID has had a huge impact on every area of our lives, every area of the council, from delivery of services to collection of taxes, and the long-term impact will take some time to become fully clear. But it is to be hoped that Omicron notwithstanding, 2022-23 will be substantially better than previous years, and the economic recovery will feed through to the council tax collections, and that the estimates made this year, or the provision made this year in the council tax base, will prove to have been over cautious. So we're going to abstain on the report as it stands on the basis of the proposed reduction. We're going to abstain on the report as it stands and the proposed reduction in the council tax base.
Thank you very much. And finally, I'll call Councillor Hopkins to speak on behalf of the Knoll Community Party. Councillor Hopkins, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I am extremely concerned that, again, we're actually having a lower tax base. I mean, in a city where we're supposed to have a position of the the priority being providing more housing, it's quite ironic, isn't it? There are two things that I think that could be done. One is that I think that there's a majority within this council for broadening the range of council tax payments and bans. And quite frankly, we have a position where, you know, if the £3 million property pays no more than a property of about a sixth of its value. And that, quite frankly, we could stretch the number of the collection base if we lobbied government, and there's a possibility that government might listen to a unified approach from this council to do something about that. Secondly, it's the student issue. Now, we in this city are not alone in having a problem with this, but we're one of the, I think, one of the outliers in terms of the push that we've made for numbers of student properties, and it's seriously affecting our overall balance and budget, and that has to be looked at again. And I think that, you know, there's a need to re-examine the policy, but as well as the situation of how far we're actually pushing, I constantly hear the mayor saying he's reached agreement with a lot of other mayors elsewhere or other leaders in other cities. I've never heard anything about those people, those leaders getting together to press central government for fair treatment on the student issue. Because quite frankly, we welcome students to the city, but there's got to be a financial contribution. And if government are saying they don't have to pay it, then government are going to have to make a fair contribution to take account of the genuine costs that we've actually got, providing reasonable services for our students. So can we ask the mayor to consider those two options of firstly bringing forward to this council the means of actually giving an indication that we would support a widening of the council tax bans, and secondly that there should be agreement on moving forward with others to getting a fair settlement on student houses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Councillor Cheney, as mover of the report, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there was a lot in there. I think so. Firstly, I recognise the Lib Dem position. I guess it's a judgment ultimately, isn't it? And we spent a lot of time back and forth on what that judgment was. I appreciate that your judgment varies from ours. It is what it is, but you know, it did involve a lot of careful analysis and thought about that. It wasn't a snap judgment that we've made. On the point about students, I mean, it is an ongoing concern nationally. I know that, you know, we're not alone with this problem. I do get slightly nervous that it feels like we end up bashing students in some senses, and we definitely need to avoid that. There does need to be some modification of the system that allows us to claim something to cover the increase in cost, particularly in a city like Bristol, and there are a few others in the same boat. That's probably all I want to say on the subject. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we move to the vote. The recommendation is that Council agrees the council tax base as set out in the report. This will be an electronic vote using the voting buttons. So please make sure you are sitting in the seat with your name on it so your vote is recorded correctly. And please vote now. Okay. Those numbers look rather low. Right, okay, let's... Okay, it looks like that may have restarted itself halfway through then, so let's clear that. And... Okay, right. We'll start again. Please vote now. That looks better. Okay. We have 54 votes for and 5 abstentions, so that recommendation is carried. Thank you very much. And we move to agenda item 12, which is the collection fund surplus or deficit for 2021-22. Councillor Cheney, would you like to introduce the report?
Yeah, thanks, my Lord Mayor. Continuing in a similar theme, really. So the pandemic continues to have a significant impact on our citizens and businesses. As previously mentioned, we continue to support many who are unable to pay through the council tax reduction scheme. Many businesses too have continued to receive support from government in business relief. That said, this year we have seen the number of missed instalments significantly increase both for council tax and business rate payers. For this reason, it is necessary to set aside additional provision to cover the possibility of being unable to collect some of these arrears, particularly the older debt. At this stage, this is considered a one-off increase which will be further reviewed at the end of the year. The deficit on business rates has been further impacted by the cost to the council of successful appeals decided by the Valuation Office. Changes in rateable values and in the business rates payable can be backdated to 2017 with the full cost for all years borne primarily by the council once the appeal is decided. This year, the amount previously set aside to provide for appeals has already been exceeded and requires a further contribution from business rate income. These increases in provisions are the primary reason for the deficit on the collection fund for 21-22, the council's share of which is 6.9 million for council tax and 4 million for business rates. I recommend this report to full council today and look forward to the debate.
Thank you very much. And I'll call Councillor Rippington once again to second the report.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I second the report and I reserve my remarks. Thanks.
Thank you. In which case, we'll move straight to Councillor Grant to speak on behalf of the Green Group. Councillor Grant, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And thank you to the Cabinet Member and the officers who've put the report together. The report describes a council tax deficit significantly higher than that of last year, which is obviously in and of itself unwelcome. But as a city, we all agree that we must continue to safeguard the council tax reduction scheme and protect the most vulnerable from the extreme burden that full payment of council tax would impose on their household finances. We've also recently heard about the ethical debt collection policy of the city and approved it. So it's understood that all efforts to close the gap on non-payment of council tax will be carried out in accordance with those values. Given the impact of the pandemic on CTRS claims and on late payment of council tax, we can hope to see this sum reduce as we move forward. The business rates deficit is lower than it was last year, which is positive, but it really is still a very significant sum. This is troubling in light of the government support that has been provided for rates payment to businesses affected by the pandemic and the fact that this support will disappear in the coming months. Nonetheless, with our current budgetary gap, it would be good to understand why it is not possible to set a more ambitious council target than 45% as the expected recovery rate of the business end year arrears, given the impact that this has on the provision for the impairment of debts. On the topic of the impairment provision, this was budgeted as 4.2 million, but is now said to be 11.2 million. It must have been clear to officers some time ago that the budget figure was going to be exceeded. Were relevant scrutiny commissions told of this at the time? The real worry on all this is the trend. In October 2021, the arrears were £20.9 million. This included 10 million related to 20/21 and before. We're now told that there is a further 21 million of bad debt likely to accrue by October 2022. The empty property relief gap is also high at £2 million. For residents, it will be useful to understand better what the reasons are for the high number of empty properties. The report is clear that the revenue team are not provided this information automatically, and it's obviously likely to be pandemic related. but an increase in NDR deficit as big as £2 million deserves more analysis. Finally, the £5.3 million bill to the Council of defending appeals and losing them is eye-watering. From a risk and audit point of view, it would be good to understand why there are so many appeals being brought by businesses to the Council, why so many are successful, and if there is something system-wide that could be done about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll call Councillor Gollop, please, to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. First comment I was going to make, I'm obviously thanking officers for their contribution to this, but I was just going to thank Councillor Brown as well for his contribution to resources. And you know, I'm not quite sure what the transfer fee is for you going to audit and us getting Councillor Hopkins back in exchange. But I'm sure there could be a value for money review of that to assess which is the best deal, or perhaps we'll just take a vote on it. My Lord Mayor, this is another technical paper, but it is really important. And one point that comes out in it is the fact that the cost of the council tax reduction scheme is £43 million. That is a significant heading within our budget. It's one that's been debated over the years, and the collective view has been that it is so fundamental that those who need it, that it has to be maintained. It is a significant sum, however, and that debate will almost certainly need to happen. And it's important that we know what the view is of the administration in terms of their ongoing commitment to the council tax reduction scheme. Now, if I move on, the other aspect, and I recognise, Councillor Cheney, that you can never win. I do understand that, because you've just been criticised because you obviously are solely responsible for fudging the figures to make them come out look this way. I'm going to say the opposite and say what I'm looking to you for assurance about is that you are confident that the council tax bad debt provision is sufficient. It was surprising that Councillor Hopkins hadn't read the last report sufficiently to actually see there was an increase in the number of properties and that the reduction was purely because of the provision. But we all know the pressures that residents are under. So I just want to be reassured that we are satisfied that the provision that's being made will be sufficient. And actually, in the same vein, the question about appeals. And I suspect you can't really answer this because the appeals is a random process and we have no idea where the outcome is going to go on the vast number of appeals that we have. It's just a question of whether the provision we've got looks adequate. For me, if I look at it cautiously, I am not sure those provisions are sufficient, and that will come back to hit us in next year's collection fund. So those are my concerns, my Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call Councillor Brown to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrat Group.
Thanks, my Lord Mayor. Since I was elected, I've become more and more of the view that the system of funding of local government and of local taxation and business rates in this country should be torn down and rebuilt. I know that the Mayor thinks that revolutionaries are not welcome in the city, but I'm afraid that's the way I feel after reading this report. I've even brought my berry today and would like to declare my membership of the militant wing of the Lib Dems. More seriously, I'm going to go off piece because others have made some of the points that I would have made on the report itself. But more seriously, aside from the factual arguments, figures in the report, with which I have no argument, and noting that it takes a more conservative approach to debt provision than previously, I believe it highlights how much of the funding of this council is founded on shaky and uncertain ground, with little to no certainty of the funding settlements it will receive year to year, or indeed how much of the business rates collected can be retained. And that undermines the whole of the council budgeting system. As we saw from the previous paper, Bristol faces many challenges that impact its finances, and the interactions with the council tax serve to emphasise those. So the disproportionate number of properties in the lower tiers, they've not been reassessed for 3 decades. The impact of the 2 universities, including students from UA who live in the city but travel to South Gloucester for their education. And I don't want to be having a go at students constantly. I know it sounds a bit like that, but it's more about the system and how the costs are borne by the city and the benefits by the costs are borne by the council and the benefits go to more broadly to the city. And also the commitment to a thorough and fair council tax reduction scheme. I think it's absolutely right that we have the council tax reduction scheme, but again, it's a cost that we have to bear as a council with no additional support from central government. We also face a broader challenge when it comes to business rates, not just in the mechanisms governing how much we retain, but also with the changing nature of business. We've now got 2 huge empty properties in Broadmead, Debenhams and Marks and Spencer's, and we have as a council and as a city to face the challenge of how we reimagine the centre of our city. If the age of the large department stores is over, then what do we do with that space instead that meets the needs of the city, the residents and the council? But anyway, that's a debate for another day. In the meantime, we are supporting this report.
Thank you very much. And I'll call Councillor Hopkins to speak on behalf of the Knoll Community Party.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Firstly, I think we need to recognise the extreme difficulty in getting money from individuals or businesses that we've faced. And I would tend to agree that, if anything, this looks a little bit on the rosy side in terms of projection, and it is a projection. Particularly when you bear in mind that next year domestic collections are going to be probably even more difficult, as a lot of people face difficulties that they haven't up to now. The only further thing I'd want to say is that it's more complicated than it was writing this report because of the various grants coming from government and exemptions, etc. But whilst it's okay for us to follow that through, I don't think it was written in such a way to be easy for a member of the public to actually follow through where the grants have come from and what effect that actually has, etc. So I'm not criticising the officer, I'm just saying it's an extra difficult event to face, and I'm not certain that's been overcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cheney, as mover of the report, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I suppose the debate, it was really good, and thank you everyone for your contributions. That was really helpful. I suppose it highlights the point around the kind of tightrope that you walk with this, doesn't it? That you know, there's a kind of appeal that we are less cautious than we currently are, and then appeals that we're more cautious than we currently are in these calculations, and it's a very difficult balance to get right. On the point about council funding, I mean, I would agree with Andrew on this. I mean, the uncertainty around you know, business rate and council tax collections being the absolute basis for the majority of our budget is a very, very difficult thing to plan around. And then finally, on the point about you know, on valuations, the valuation office actually do those appeals themselves. So there was an error in the calculation in 2017, I believe. So lots of people are eligible for a recalculation of their business rates, and there are brokers ringing around the city right now telling people that they should appeal their business rates. I know because I got one telling us that we could reduce the amount of business rates we pay on this building. So anyway, so yes, thank you all for your contributions. It's very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So the recommendations as shown on the screen are to declare the estimated deficits as set out in the report. Again, this will be an electronic vote. So please vote now. Okay, so 58 votes for, none against and no abstentions, so that recommendation is carried. And that concludes that agenda item. So we move to agenda item 13, which is the appointment of external auditors for 23-24 and onwards. And I'll call Councillor Dyer as Vice Chair of the Audit Committee to move the report. Councillor Dyer.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is the second time I've had to step into somebody else's shoes at relatively short notice. The first time was when my fellow councillor, Carla Denyer, was elected as co-leader of the Green Party. So I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate Councillor Gary Hopkins on being elected leader of the Noah Community Party. Can I also... I don't want anybody else to declare whether they're going to be standing for leader of their party at this particular stage, but if you can give me a bit of warning beforehand next time, please. On a more serious note, I welcome the appointment earlier today, or a few minutes ago, of Councillor Andrew Brown, but it does illustrate the fact that we now have an audit committee in which every single member was elected at the last election. In that circumstances, and recognising the fact that audit is at a critical function, it's becoming much more difficult as local authorities in general become more complex. And there is a need for some form of institutional history of what has happened before so that we can learn for the future. We have an excellent team of internal auditors, and I'm very glad that we had unanimous support for appointment of the external auditors going forward. So I very much recommend and propose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call Councillor Cheney to second the report.
I'll second the report, reserving my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, there'll be no debate on this item, so we'll move straight to the vote. The recommendation is as shown on the screen. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Good. Then that recommendation is carried, and that concludes agenda item 13. We'll move then to agenda item 14, the annual report of the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman decisions. I will move this report, which is for noting. So we'll move straight to the debate, and I call Councillor Goodman to speak, please, on behalf of the Labour Group. Councillor Goodman, you have 3 minutes.
Hello. The Ombudsman report for the year ending 31st of March 2021 paints a mixed picture. We were well above the national average in the percentage of complaints being upheld by the Ombudsman, but we were also, however, above the national average in effectively remedying complaints before they got to the Ombudsman. COVID has obviously affected the performance of all organisations. It has led to a strain on the council, especially through officers being off work sick or needing to work in isolation rather than being able to meet in person to discuss cases. This is in addition to the strains caused by over a decade of central government cuts in local government funding under so-called austerity. This considerable and prolonged budget pressure is acknowledged by the Ombudsman, alongside considerable and prolonged demand pressures. These strains were reflected in the number of upheld complaints having risen by 8% in similar authorities since 2018. One of the issues the report states is a concern over the time it took for the Council to respond to complaints and indeed to the Ombudsman. Regardless of COVID, Bristolians should still receive responses in reasonable timeframes. In response to the 2 complaints for non-compliance, the Council carried out an internal investigation into its complaints handling, recognised it had resource issues, put in place an action plan to address the issues, increased staff resources to deal with complaints, and improved mechanisms for monitoring complaints. With these changes in place, we hope to see improvements in the coming year. In a city as big as Bristol, with a council that has some 8,000 employees and a population of nearly 500,000, there are always going to be slip-ups and room for improvement. The important thing is that organisational flaws are addressed and lessons are learned about how we can constantly improve our services and ensure that Bristolians have a responsive, citizen-focused council. With the continuing squeeze on local government funds, it is reassuring to hear that we are prioritising the resources to improve the issues that were raised in this report. Despite being forced to make further savings of 19 million in the budget for next year, I hope we will continue to see improvements in the complaint handling process and will work with my colleagues in the Audit Committee to seek assurance that that is the case.
Thank you very much. I now call Councillor White to speak on behalf of the Green Group. Councillor White, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'll keep this very brief, especially because I'm not going to copy what Zoe just said. But my first point was I found it quite difficult to put this in context with other authorities. I did do some research, and so Sheffield had 17 upheld complaints, Brighton and Hove had 12, for example. So we're not out of kilter in our performance, although no complaint is good news. Let's be absolutely clear about that. Just really endorse what you said about the complaints, and that was highlighted in the report about the way we communicate. I was approached this week by a resident in my ward who features in the report, and his frustration about the communication that actually led up to him making the Ombudsman complaint. So it's really good to hear that some of that's being addressed, and I would welcome that and want to see some further feedback on that as we progress that. So that's a problem, but I'm glad it's being addressed. I'm obviously not going to go through the cases in detail, but one did just strike me through my kind of experience of health and social care, which is really one person that had been waiting 4 years for a review of their current placement in their accommodation. Really good to see that that's been tackled, and the policy now is to review those cases on an annual basis. I think you'd agree, though, an annual for that kind of thing is still quite a long time. This is not particularly a criticism of social care. I'm really making the point because I think it underlines the pressure our social care services are under. And I just want to be mindful of that as we kind of roll into and start talking about the budget processes, because clearly a yearly review on these kind of complex placements is not really good enough. So again, without wanting to go over what Zoe said, I shall leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I call Councillor Galandras to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. Generally speaking, no organisation, whether in the public or private sector, likes to receive a complaint, let alone 6,148 complaints in just 1 year. And yet complaints can be a useful indicator to a chief executive or head of department as to what is working well and, more importantly, what is not working well in his or her organisation. In my experience, companies and public bodies which embrace complaints rather than try and run away from them show genuine customer improvement over time. In the report, there are details of learnings and actions from specific complaints. That's good. What's not so good is a common thread which links many of the complaints, which suggests a reluctance to take the initial complaint seriously, a culture of corporate denial rather than corporate action. Residents have shown me emails where a council officer, instead of making an effort to understand the complaint, seeking advice from senior management where appropriate, has simply replied to the resident by sending details of how to start the local government ombudsman complaints process. This suggests a cultural problem. Senior management needs to make it clear to all staff that engaging with complaints is the right response. It's not an adversarial battle. Residents are the people who pay the salaries. They are not the enemy. Residents via their complaints might even have spotted a material deficiency in a council process. Free management consultancy. The other worrying aspect of the report is point 13, i.e. the formal comments of the Ombudsman. They don't make good reading at all. It's particularly worrying to read that in some cases the Council failed to implement agreed Ombudsman recommendations. Clearly, officers still in denial even after an Ombudsman decision. The concluding comments from the Ombudsman are also, frankly, both shocking and shameful. And remember, this is the Ombudsman writing, not an eccentric councillor. At one stage, we were not receiving any responses to our investigations, and we had to threaten to issue a witness summons to elicit the information requested. Wow. Many people make New Year resolutions. A really good corporate New Year's resolution would be for the Council to adopt a fresh approach to complaints in 2022, seeing them as opportunities to improve customer service and not attacks to be repelled. Perhaps a system of all responses to resident complaints being overseen by departmental heads before being sent out. Let's learn from last year's damning report, and let's ensure this year we see a much more positive approach to complaint handling. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much. And I now call Councillor Clark to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrat Group.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I would just like to read out a part of the annual letter from the Ombudsman, and I quote, "We had to make additional inquiries because the initial responses were incomplete. It was only when a witness summons was threatened that the information was provided. I trust the Council will consider ways to improve its responses to this office to ensure future investigations are not unnecessarily delayed. As you may have realised, because I'm sure you've all read the report, that I'm quoting from last year's report, which came to full council last January. So, as I read this year's report, my expectation must have been that things would have improved. But within a couple of paragraphs, I have to say my heart was filled with something approaching jaw-dropping horror. I would like to again read a few extracts to highlight that this administration is going backwards in its service delivery and its blatant disregard for both its residents and the office of the Ombudsman. So I'd like to quote, "During the year, we issued one public report about the Council's failure to implement agreed recommendations in 2 previous cases we investigated. The Council failed to provide evidence of its compliance with the agreed recommendations, despite numerous requests and opportunities to do so. As a result, we registered a new complaint against the Council about this failure to comply. I issued a public report to highlight the Council's failure to do what it had agreed to, demonstrating a clear breakdown in its compliance governance arrangements and oversight. We consider that when a council agrees to take action to remedy a complaint, it should be accountable for that action and make every effort to comply. The year also highlights more general concerns about the Council's responses to our inquiries. Several of our investigations were delayed by your Council's failure to respond in a timely way to our requested information. At one stage, we were not receiving any responses and had to threaten to issue a witness summons to elicit the information we requested." That's all quotes from the report. Personally, I'm quite beyond words, actually, I have to say. This report is damning, and this administration should be ashamed of itself. I'm really sorry, and I really hope that this time next year we get a better report from the Ombudsman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I will call Councillor Hopkins to speak, please, on behalf of the Knoll Community Party.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I wish to agree with a lot of the comments from both of the previous 2 speakers. I think it was Volvo who originally got the idea that a customer complaint was an opportunity, and it's been shown over a long period of time that organisations who make mistakes but rectify them get more loyalty and more respect from their customers than those who don't make mistakes at all. Unfortunately, these complaints to the Ombudsman represent the end of a very long struggle for individuals. I think people who've not been directly involved don't possibly realise how many processes, how much battling people have actually got to go through before they even get to the Ombudsman. And in this authority, there's a lot of processes, there's a lot of barriers to actually stop that actually happening. When they actually get there, it's worrying to see, as well as those individual courts that we've actually had, that in this authority, 83% of the complaints that got to the Ombudsman were upheld. That's significantly higher than the comparable average of 63%. That in itself is worrying, but we're worse than the average. It's not just a fluke. Also, we didn't, in actual fact, comply with the Ombudsman's recommendations universally, which elsewhere even authorities have made serious mistakes. At least they're recognised and got it right afterwards. We didn't in a number of cases. So, yes, this is a damning report. There's hidden beneath it a lot of other concerns and complaints about customer service. And I've got to say that 1 or 2 of them are with regard to the owned companies, which are more difficult for us as councillors to actually look at and actually investigate. There is less openness in that system. So I would suggest that we need to be saying to the administration, this is 2 very bad years we've had of reports from the Ombudsman. Let's make certain there isn't a third.
Thank you. So the recommendation is to note the report, and so it is noted. In just a moment, we're going to take an adjournment. Just before, when we do take the adjournment, refreshments will be served in the group rooms along the corridor, and the conference hall behind me will also be available. But just before we go, the first item when we come back from the adjournment will be the golden motion. So I would recommend that those members who declared an interest earlier and will not be part of that item don't come straight back in for the start of the meeting. But if you want to participate in the silver motion, please do keep an eye on the progress of the debate and be ready to come back into the room so that we can move on for that. Those of us that are coming back for the golden motion, please be back in your seats at 4:15, ready to start. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome back. Now, before we continue, we suspect at this stage that the motions item is going to exceed the 30 minutes permitted for it, and the meeting as a whole will slightly run over the 2.5 hours permitted. So at this stage, I propose that we extend the meeting in order to take in both gold and silver motions, which we estimate will take us up to round about 5:10. All those in favour say aye? Aye. Thank you very much. Then we'll do that. Now, just before we take the silver motion, I did say earlier that I would allow an opportunity for anyone who had taken advice who didn't earlier declare an pecuniary interest who would now like to do so. Is there anybody in that position? No. OK, good. In that case, we will move on with the golden motion, and I will call Councillor Reynard of the Labour Group to move the motion. Councillor, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We have a motion here that all members of this chamber have an opportunity to support today, whether they're in this room or not, as I appreciate some have been unable to make it due to COVID-19 or because they may have a conflict of interest as a landlord or for other reasons. This is a matter very close to the hearts of many who have been left vulnerable and exploited by rogue landlords and letting agents that discriminate against those on benefits, something that we know is illegal. As highlighted by a statement made earlier today, there are issues that many private landlords are only renting to certain types of people in our city. If you're someone on benefits, if you're on lower incomes, if you don't have a guarantor, self-employed and freelancers, all of these groups are being prevented from renting homes in Bristol. And this is because of discrimination that plays out through demands for projected incomes, employment checks, upfront payments or outright refusals. Despite alleviating measures such as the council tax reduction scheme, people are struggling financially. More people currently are on benefits due to the pandemic, so the effects of any DSS discrimination is likely to be acutely felt. Bristol City Council has limited powers when it comes to the regulation of the private rented sector locally. However, where we do, under this administration, we will be exercising them. Whether that is through introducing new landlord licensing schemes, applying for banning orders for the worst of rogue landlords in this city, or highlighting the support we can provide to renters across Bristol. I remember a direct action campaign I was involved in with ACORL many years ago, when it came to light that the bank, TSB, had clauses in its buy-to-let mortgages saying it was forbidden for landlords to rent the houses they buy to students, asylum seekers and anyone in receipt of any benefit, even in work. That campaign was won very quickly, and rightly so, as what the bank was doing was downright wrong and completely immoral. As an administration, we are keeping a close eye on when the proposed Renters Reform Bill white paper will actually arrive. This will be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reset the power imbalance between renters and landlords, end Section 21 no-fault evictions, and so much more. My commitment to renters across this city is that I will continue to fight for the powers for rent controls and the living rent. I will continue to fight to protect renters in this city where I am able to do so. I will continue to fight against discrimination in the private rented sector, and I will continue to fight for more protections for renters, addressing the power imbalance we currently have. I ask that as elected representatives of this chamber, that you all do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now call Councillor Hornchin of the Labour Group to second the motion.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I second this motion. Let me tell you, members, a story of about 20 years ago when I was made nearly homeless. I had been living in London for about 3 years. I was working as a waitress and I was studying part-time. My budgets were tight, my income precarious. But I never missed a rent payment, even though this meant beans and tin tomatoes for the week the rent was paid. Then I became ill. Nothing serious, probably a cold or a flu, but I could not work for 3 weeks. Because of this, I applied for benefits. Unfortunately, just at this time, my landlord decided he was moving back to London and gave me notice. I immediately started looking for a new place to stay. I spent the better part of 2 months looking for a place, but whenever I looked, the landlords or the agents refused because I was on benefits. Their adverts displayed no DSS. My income was not hugely different to the years before. In fact, it was more stable. My track record of paying rent was good. In the last week, before moving out date, I managed to find a flat. All the stress surrounding the poverty and near homelessness took a toll on my mental health, and I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, thus prolonging the period I needed benefits. A person can be on benefits because they're temporarily unemployed. They can be on benefits because they're disabled or sick. They can be on benefits because they are raising children or they're caring for another human being. But mostly people are on benefits because they have a lack of money. Being benefits does not make you unreliable. It was only years later that I realised that no DSS policies have been found to be unlawful and discriminatory under the Equalities Act. But at the same time, the discrimination still goes on. The stigma persists. A home gives a person stability in an ever-changing world. A home helps a family thrive, support each other. A home is one of the most basic requirements for a healthy life, both physical and mental. A home is the foundation from which to rebuild your life. For too long, this country has been seeing property as an investment, as a credit reference, and not as a right every person should have to thrive and contribute to their society in their own way. I urge members to do the decent thing and vote for this motion.
Thank you very much. We will now move to debate on the motion, and I call Councillor Bennett of the Labour Group. Councillor, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and apologies that I'm the third Labour speaker in a row supporting this excellent motion. I rent, so I know firsthand how difficult it can be finding a suitable place at a price that you can afford. As we've heard during public statements, this problem is far trickier if you're on a form of benefit. Landlords and letting agents often ask for income checks when letting a property, which is fair enough. But too many landlords won't then allow benefit payments to be counted when asking to see a prospective tenant's income. The adverts of working professionals only are all too familiar when you're looking at adverts. And there's no good reason to allow a salaried person to rent a property but not so on benefits if their incomes are the same. It's discrimination, plain and simple. Not only is this class discrimination, but disability discrimination too, as many disabled people claim personal independence payments. The practice of no DSS continues, despite the courts ruling it unlawful and discriminatory, so it's welcome that this motion commits to the Council to doing it all it can to stamp it out in Bristol, and I want to thank Shelter for their crucial work in highlighting this issue. We might have a Prime Minister who's happy to break the law, but in Bristol we go after the rule breakers, and our landlord licensing scheme has been driving up housing standards in the private rented sector and tackling bad landlords in my ward of Eastville and elsewhere. This motion gives us the chance to go further still and improve things so fewer people are forced to live in housing which is unsafe or dangerous. The scheme doesn't yet cover the whole city, although I hope Tom will have some good news on that soon. So this motion commits us to awareness campaigns, weaker housing standards, and helping tenants take discriminatory letting agents to the appropriate authorities. It's only right that we dedicate council resources to eradicating this illegal practice from our city. The motion also calls for the council to campaign against the universal credit cut. Even if benefit claimants weren't discriminated against, the rising cost of rent and the cuts in universal credit mean few people could afford rent. The under £25 rate is only 64 quid a week, and I don't think anyone here could honestly claim that they could survive on that, especially if they had to pay rent. That's only £257 a month. Good luck finding somewhere to live on that. But this motion isn't the end of our ambition to support people who are struggling to get by. Our budget, which comes to Cabinet next week, maintains the council tax reduction scheme in full, meaning people on the lowest incomes won't have to pay a penny in council tax. This scheme is an absolute lifesaver whilst we face a cost of living crisis, and it's worth noting how we're the only core city to maintain the 100% rate despite continued austerity. To conclude, Lord Mayor, this crucial motion ensures those on benefits have extra security renting, and I thank Tom Renard for bringing it forward. I hope every councillor will give it their support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just before I call the next speaker, I'll just gently remind members that questioning policy is absolutely fine in this chamber, but questioning the morals of individuals who are not here to defend themselves shouldn't be part of a speech. I'll now call Councillor Hathaway to speak on behalf of the Green Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. On behalf of the Greens and renters on benefits who might have been excluded from today's debate, I'd like to welcome this motion from Councillor Renard, which recognises the ongoing prejudice those seeking to rent face when searching for a home simply for claiming benefits. A roof over our heads is critical to living happy and healthy lives and should be recognised as a fundamental human right. In Bristol today, over 130,000 of us live in private rented homes. The housing charity Shelter ran a Home Truths campaign back in 2020 to collect experiences of the private rental market in the city. Along with unaffordability from spiralling rents and insecurity from short tenancies, discrimination for claiming housing benefit was frequently raised. These issues helped form the Bristol Fair Renting Campaign's manifesto, and this motion today takes a strong step towards addressing one of these issues with the powers available to the Council. As has been described, no DSS policies means no benefits or universal credit, filtering out those in receipt of welfare for housing when selecting new tenants for a property. Keep in mind that over the course of the first year of the pandemic, there was a 64% increase in private renters claiming housing benefit in Bristol. And we heard during public forum today of people impacted by the policy. Based on DWP data, no DSS policies have a disproportionately negative impact on BAME and disabled people and women, and as such, overt DSS policies by landlords and letting agents have been ruled illegal by the courts under the Equality Act. But as a renter, I've seen myself that these still persist in the city, alongside more subtle practices that result ultimately in exclusion of benefit claimants. We therefore welcome the commitment to eliminating this practice across the city and a recognition that more work must be done to support renters in challenging landlords and letting agents. This is so important in stamping out the idea that those in receipt of welfare are somehow less deserving of that roof over their heads. We're all aware that many current renters don't challenge for fear of retribution when tenancies are up for renewal or even Section 21 eviction notices being served. I hope this is the first step of many towards redressing the balance in Bristol, and I look forward to working with the administration to press for additional powers from central government to protect renters if or when they get round to producing that delayed private renting reform bill. We must bring back thinking of housing as providing homes, not assets. As Greens, we say that having the capital in bricks and mortar to provide a home to a family, or even just to sole someone, is a privilege, but excluding a group of people because of where their rent comes from should not be.
Thank you. I now call Councillor Weston to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group.
Thank you very much, my Lord Mayor. I note the chuckle when I stand. I hadn't even indulged in poetry or jokes yet. But I apologise for it. No, okay, fair enough. No, I understand. I'm a funny guy. I think the motion before us, 95% of it, we utterly agree with. And this is the problem. And I'm going to talk about the problem, and then I'll go back to where we agree. It's the last paragraph. It almost feels like Councillor Wren and I went, oh gosh, I'm in danger here of actually getting complete consensus. So I'll bolt on a final paragraph that means the Conservatives can't support it, so therefore we can't have unanimity in the chamber. It just feels like that. I'm a big fan of science fiction and fantasy movies, and I love Dusk Till Dawn. And there's that moment where you're watching the movie, and you know, it's a gangster movie. And then the crowbar plot change, and things change rapidly. And it's something about vampires. And when you read your motion, you get 95% through, and then you get that final paragraph, which talks about the end to the COVID emergency universal credit top-up, and then it talks about increasing the housing benefit to cover rents. But let's be honest about it, you don't mention the taper effect changes that came in, so it's only half the universal credit you talk about, and then you seem to ignore the iron law of supply and demand. If you want rents down, then ending or increasing the housing benefit doesn't change that. What it does is it puts rents up higher. You have to increase supply. And South Gloucestershire are building more affordable homes than Bristol are. And they're a smaller authority. So the reality is you're ignoring the bit that we really need to focus on in order to make sure there's not unanimity in the chamber. And that's unfortunate for us because 95% of what you've written is good. DSS discrimination is an abomination. It shouldn't be allowed. I spent 10 years renting in this city. I know the stress of a 6-month rental when it comes up. I also know, and what's not been mentioned, is the stress when you've got a young family. Both my daughter and my son were born when we were renting, and the knowledge that you could be out every 6 months as it got renewed and all the costs that go with that, having to pay for the removal van and everything else, that's an enormous stress on a family. It's horrific. I mean, I actually prefer the German model, to be honest, when it comes to rental protections. I mean, where you go with something along the lines of a 3-year rental, and the tenant can leave with 3 months' notice, but the landlord can only evict for destruction of property or the failure to pay rent. Because I believe it provides that surety to families, particularly young families, that are struggling right at the beginning. We can lobby on that jointly, and I'd love to have a coffee with you, and we can draft that letter, because I think that's essential. And we can see that in the city. When we look in the city centre, where more and more young families are staying, because what used to happen is they'd have the family move to the suburbs. That doesn't happen. They're staying in the centre, which has brought all the changes and the challenges with the schooling. So I think there's a lot we can work on, and 95% of it is good. It's a shame you tagged on the last paragraph, because I don't think you wanted unanimity. So we're not going to vote for it, but I would like a coffee to work on where we can lobby collectively, because I do think we need to make sure there are more protections for renters. But this motion for us isn't all of it. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much. And I will now call Councillor Varney of the Liberal Democrat.
Councillor Classic speaking instead.
Oh, I do apologise. I've got last-minute changes. Sorry about that, Councillor Classic. Please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
So I, like many other councillors here and like many people in the city, am a renter. I myself am actually one of the lucky ones. I have a good, diligent landlord who responds quickly to issues, and I have been in my home for a number of years. However, as a renter, I still live with a level of fear that at any time my landlord could decide to sell the property, as has happened to 2 of my Lib Dem colleagues this year, or last year actually. And I would be left to navigate Bristol's private rental market. The booming housing market is putting more stress on an already crazy market. This is causing rental properties to be sold, and more renters are scrabbling after dwindling stock. The high level of competition within this market is giving rise to discriminatory practices for landlords and letting agents. While it's technically unlawful to discriminate against tenants on benefits, the competition for properties is so fierce that letting agents and landlords are able to ensure their preferred tenants' applications are successful. And they can discriminate without even having to say no DSS or no whatever discriminatory they want. Just somebody in work will get the place. This is obviously leaving marginalised and vulnerable people in our city unable to find secure housing. Couple this with the loss of incomes and an increase in the amount of people relying on universal credit due to the pandemic, and you have a serious recipe for increasing homelessness in the city. And even when people are making it into housing, that doesn't guarantee their properties are suitable or their housing secure. Anecdotally, a friend of mine is currently facing the potential loss of her home after resisting a rental increase that would be more than she could reasonably afford and reporting a few necessary repairs to the landlord. Apparently, they have now found evidence of damp in her home. She doesn't remember anyone coming to inspect. And the landlord needs a vacant property to rectify. The reality is that it's likely once she leaves, the landlord will slap some paint on the walls and then is free to relist the property at a much higher price, knowing that he'll easily fill it. During this process, she's frequently been told conflicting and incorrect information from her letting agents, which has seriously confused the situation. And this is not a unique situation in Bristol. This is happening to renters all over the city. This is something people are facing. And while my friend is relatively stable in her job, there are people in much less stable conditions without jobs, without the resources to fight this adequately. And they are losing their homes. It's being taken away by unscrupulous landlords who value their profits over providing secure housing to their tenants. As residents of Bristol, we all deserve a safe home, and this motion will strengthen the council's ability to ensure everyone has access to this. We need to ensure that renters are not discriminated against and that there are penalties for landlords who act in an unlawful way. We need to strengthen the council's ability to stop renters on universal credit or benefits from being discriminated out of the rental market, as this accounts for some of the most vulnerable residents in the city. The private rental market in Bristol does not work for people living in it, and so we will be supporting this motion to better protect renters in the city.
Thank you very much. And I call Councillor Hopkins on behalf of the Knoll Community Party.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to agree that there needs to be absolutely fundamental reform of the housing ownership and letting market in this country, and that we as a council are limited in what we can actually do. I think that the way that the property in this country is skewed as being an investment rather than for people, somewhere for people to live, sort of says it all, really. I think also when you look at what actually, when people are breaking the law, which undoubtedly a lot of landlords are, isn't it useful to actually understand why they're doing it? If we're looking at people who are doing breaking and entering or shoplifting or whatever, we'd look at the underlying cause of why that's actually happening. And in terms of the landlords, yes, a number of them are just absolutely greedy and just want to maximise every penny that they actually can get. But some others would quite happily accept people on full benefits. The difficulty is that they know that somewhere down the line, the government are going to make life difficult for them by not uprating the amount of allowance that the tenants actually get. And what do they want to be in a position of? Throwing people out in the street? They certainly, most responsible landlords certainly don't want to do that. It's not in their interest. And the other thing, quite bluntly, is this and other councils quite often are actually rather slow in adjusting the benefit payments to people. So I've spoken to tenants over and landlords over a period of time where basically, they're having to wait several months to actually get the rent that they're actually due. It's not the fault of the tenants, but actually it's not the fault of the landlord in a number of those cases either. So we need to do everything that we can to actually understand the problem and not just put a sticking plaster on it. I believe that the aims of this are worthy, although, as has been said, some will find it difficult to support the universal credit adjustment. I don't, but others might. But I think that we need to work together more constructively to find a way where the whole housing market and rental can be actually changed to take account really not of private profit, but of security of tenure, which at the moment, I don't think this motion actually really tackles the fundamentals. So we'll support it, okay. There's no major problem with it, but I think that we need to look a little deeper. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Leonard, as mover of the motion, would you like to respond? Please, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We've heard many accounts today about the impact on private renters, and I just wanted to briefly share one of my own from the last place I rented before I was fortunate enough to get on the housing ladder. When I was renting, the landlord refused to carry out some repairs, but more importantly, he then tried to lock us into that tenancy during COVID-19 when we were looking to move out and demand we continue to pay rent. And this is just one example of many that we've heard. And I can only speak for myself when I talk about the stress, the damage in terms of mental health and the impact that had on me and my partner in what was already a stressful time as the country was locking down. There is so much more we need to do, absolutely. Is this motion going to cover every issue in the private renter sector? No. They are vast and they are many. I would be delighted to have coffee with you, Councillor Weston. I live in your ward, so it shouldn't be too difficult to arrange, to talk about the contents of a letter where we can ensure that there is a strong position on many of these issues. What I will say, though, is that housing benefit and the levels of local housing allowance have not kept pace with rents in Bristol. We are a massive outlier and continue to be. Less than 5% of stock in the private rented sector in Bristol is affordable on housing benefit. And when you think about that 60,000 properties in total, give or take, it is an absolute scandal. Key workers can no longer afford to rent in this city, and it is something that we need to address urgently, and we need those powers to be able to do so. So I would ask Councillor Weston and Conservative colleagues on the bench if you could have a chat with Boris and the National Party MPs. Where is our renters reform bill? It has been promised for over 2 years. It needs to be coming now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will move to the vote on the motion. This will be an electronic vote on the voting buttons. Yep, please vote now. Okay, so we have 40 votes for the motion, 6 against and 1 abstention, and so that motion is carried. So at this point, please don't go anywhere. I'm just going to pause very briefly to allow those members who are sitting out the golden motion and want to participate in the silver one to come back in. So if you're in a room down the corridor watching this on YouTube, now is your time.
Lord Mayor, do you want to ring your bell, as it were, to encourage people to come back?
Okay, I think that's probably everyone who is coming, so let's move on then, please. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, thank you very much. Just a note for the minutes, there was an issue with the voting buttons. Councillor Scott's vote against the previous motion didn't count, so that will be added to the tally, but of course it won't change the outcome of the motion. Right. I think that's everybody back who we're expecting. So we'll move on to the silver motion, which is published on the website, and I will ask, I think I've got it right this time, Councillor Varney of the Liberal Democrat Group to move the motion. Councillor Varney, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I am pretty sure that everyone here was horrified by the unprecedented flooding in parts of Northern Europe last July, a disaster which could so easily have happened here in Bristol. 2021 has been another record-breaking year in terms of the number and intensity of catastrophic weather events that have occurred around the world. These events have caused loss of life to thousands, brought misery to millions, and in terms of damage have and will cost billions. The climate emergency is undoubtedly an issue that concerns all of us. We are all aware of the extreme seriousness of the situation and the urgency of which we need to take action. Therefore, I'm sure everyone is pleased that Bristol City Council is taking its responsibilities seriously, including the announcement that it is committed to doubling tree canopy cover across the city over the next 3 decades. Planting more trees is one of the best responses we can make to the climate emergency. And trees, especially street trees, not only have enormous environmental benefits, but also social and economic benefits too. Countless research has shown that trees reduce the risk of flooding, absorb pollution, counter the heat island effect of the urban environment, increase biodiversity and provide wildlife corridors, boost economic activity, help with people's mental health, and even reduce road rage and crime. The benefits are endless. However, the lack of suitable sites for street trees across the city and the high cost of installation is deeply concerning. In my own ward of Brislington West, very, very few sites have been identified, and so it is difficult to see how doubling our tree canopy cover can be easily achieved, especially in areas where trees would be most beneficial. Furthermore, Bristol is continuing to lose its mature trees at an alarming rate, either to make way for development, because of disease, or in some cases because they are perceived to be a nuisance rather than an asset. The Mayor demands solutions, so here is mine. Today, I'm proposing that we investigate the feasibility of setting up a front garden tree scheme to be run by Bristol City Council. There are potentially many thousands of front gardens across the city which would provide suitable sites for tree planting with nearly all the benefits of street trees, but at a fraction of the cost. I am delighted to have the support of members of the Bristol Tree Forum, various local wildlife groups, the Campaign for Protection of Rural England, city councillors past and present from across the political spectrum, and local residents from all over Bristol. Therefore, I call on all councillors here today to support this motion, which will hopefully make a valuable contribution in our fight against climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Councillor Kent of the Liberal Democrat Group to second the motion.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I will make sure I'm brief. So in seconding this motion, thank you. I think this is a great idea, and I hope that everybody in the chamber will support this. We already heard that we have a council policy to greatly increase the canopy coverage here in Bristol. And this is the sort of good, simple idea that will help us achieve that, because one of the biggest problems we also now face as a council is cost, is money. In many places we know street trees are not possible. There's not the space for them on the pavement. It's not possible because of cost. But here's a simple solution which could dynamically change our streets. When we walk down streets, what we want is a pleasant environment. And here we could achieve that by encouraging people to use their front gardens as places to grow those street trees. So I hope that everybody in the chamber will back this idea. I think quite often the mayor says, bring me ideas. I think here is a really good, simple idea that the city should embrace, and hopefully we'll all vote for that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Councillor King to speak on behalf of the Labour Group. Councillor King, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Varney, for bringing this forward. It's a constructive motion on an important issue. It falls under my portfolio and it's been on our office's radar for some time. It was also the part of a subject of in a scrutiny tree cross-party group. And so it's been on a conversation that we've had that's been quite constructive. I'm happy to say that the Labour Group welcomes the Silver motion on bringing forward a front garden tree scheme. This motion addresses a small but important area that is detailed in a forthcoming paper coming to Cabinet shortly, which will set out to create a tree planting plan and strategy for Bristol. This strategy will be a detailed map of all the tree planting opportunities in the city, including woodlands, orchards, street trees, both in the public and private realm, so that we have a full and thorough audit of suitable planting locations, as well as garden trees. The plan will do an in-depth assessment of possible tree planting funds, grants and sponsorship opportunities, scaled-up tree procurement strategies and planting methods. It will recognise that Bristol's tree cover is unevenly distributed and take a public health approach to target areas of high deprivation or low canopy, which often go hand in hand, as priority planting sites that will help address health inequalities as we strive towards environmental justice. The plan will create the groundwork for upscaling our tree planting efforts and enable us to use the One City platform to engage city partners in working together to reach the city goal of doubling the tree canopy. It will also provide the scoping work that will enable us to apply for large-scale bids. It is not expected that garden trees will contribute significantly to canopy growth. However, as well as the benefits the motion mentions, they could be a great way to engage residents in the target of doubling canopy, which is important. If councillors find that residents are interested but perhaps lack the space for a tree, I would encourage them to go onto the council's website and learn about the various tree planting and maintenance volunteering opportunities that are available as another way for them to engage. At-scale tree planting is a priority for this administration. We recognise the important role that canopy plays as part of a holistic strategic approach to achieving our climate, ecological and social justice targets. To conclude, we are happy to support this motion and I hope to see support from other parties when our tree strategy comes to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Councillor Edwards to speak on behalf of the Green Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I rise to support this motion by Councillor Varney, which recognises how vital trees are to tackling climate change and acknowledges the climate emergency that we are in. It will be no surprise that the Greens support this motion, as we know how essential it is to increase Bristol's tree canopy. This motion asks full council to recognise that increasing tree cover must be a priority. I agree. Trees are one of our first lines of defence against climate change and mitigation of its effects, through street cooling and sequestering carbon and creating homes for wildlife, as well as improving the physical and mental well-being of its residents. However, while we share the sentiment of this motion, the action is, pardon the pun, a bit low-hanging fruit. And while I support this motion, which will increase the number of trees, we also need to be more proactive. Planting trees is undoubtedly a positive action. If any of you have been tree planting, maybe with the 1 tree per child programme, and I really recommend you do, you'll know how satisfying it is. But you may not know that just planting small whips and nursery specimens, whether in green spaces or as this motion proposes in people's front gardens, does not do much to increase the current tree canopy. That takes years we do not have. To quote writer Oliver Rackham, tree planting is not synonymous with conservation. It is an admission that conservation has failed. So, while tree planting should absolutely be part of our forward plan, we must focus even more on protecting our established trees. What I would like this motion to also do is make us think about how we can protect our mature urban trees. Planning decisions, regeneration of urban areas, even management of roads and highways must take established trees into consideration and protect them and add more wherever possible. If trees are not well maintained or felled because of careless damage or thoughtless planning, like Oliver Rackham said, we have failed. Finally, I would like this motion to also inspire a much wider conversation about tree distribution in the city. We have real access inequality to trees and green spaces in Bristol. As the Golden motion highlighted, Bristol is a city of renters, with ever more people living in flats. Not everyone has a front garden. And in inner city areas with lower numbers of private homes and gardens, we also see the lowest tree coverage. Eastern, Central, Hotwells and Harbourside all have 10% or less. These are not areas with lots of front gardens, so we must address tree inequality in those areas as well. So while I absolutely support this motion, and I urge you all to support it, can I please also ask us to do more? Like taking that key message of the motion about the urgency of mitigating the impact of climate change by increasing the tree canopy as being the most significant part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Councillor Sharon Scott to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group.
My Lord Mayor, this is my maiden speech and I am very happy to support this motion. Thank you. Which I am sure will command the backing of all members in this chamber. Many of the reasons for endorsing the proposed project are helpfully set out in the resolution itself and have already been mentioned by previous speakers. Nationally, the government is committed to increasing the tree planting rates across the UK to, I believe, 30,000 acres per year by the end of Parliament. As part of the England Trees Action Plan 2021 to 24, over 500 million is to be spent on trees and the provision of woodlands. All this needs to go hand in hand with much greater protection of established mature trees and ancient forestry. In fact, one of the reasons behind the continuing controversy over fencing off the Stoke Lodge playing fields near my ward was concerns over the impact this is having on the trees there. Locally, as Councillor Varney has reminded us, the Council is committed to doubling the city tree canopy by 2046. The creation of an urban forest constitutes an important part of the One City plan. There are admittedly challenging targets, and we could be seen for some as facing huge obstacles. However, I am reminded here of the words of the late Desmond Tutu, who said, "There is only one way to eat an elephant, a bite at a time." This was a modern take on the advice first given by Francis of Assisi, who suggested we start by doing what's necessary, then do what's possible, and suddenly you are doing the impossible. This also plays a part in Bristol being part of the Queen's Green Canopy initiative to plant a tree for the Jubilee. Councillor Varney's proposal is one small step towards greening our city. The benefits of trees have been long researched and documented. For me, I would highlight their role in reducing air and noise pollution, providing habitats for wildlife, and enhancing or enriching our surroundings. Clearly, there are also practical and financial considerations which apply here. Trees need to be properly sited and managed to avoid property and structural damage. Many houses simply don't have the space to accommodate plantings or could have their insurance invalidated if a tree is placed too close to a property or household utilities infrastructure. Room will obviously be an additional factor when working with larger native species like ash and beech. The avoidance of potential damage and maintenance costs was... In any event, all we are being asked to do is task officers with preparing a report on a front garden tree scheme. This should be looked at, if only to try to reverse the current trend of converting these areas into hard standing for cars. I believe this is a positive move, and thanks again to Councillor Varney for raising this issue. I hope it will be endorsed by all. To conclude, my Lord Mayor, in the words of the famous Chinese proverb, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much. And I call Councillor Hopkins to speak on behalf of the Knoll Community Party.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Firstly, I think this brings the the petition that we had earlier on into clear focus. The effort that's be required to actually make a significant difference by planting new trees when we're actually proposing to rip up mature trees for development, which is not appropriate. Secondly, what I would like to say is that, you know, trees in a street provide something extra, and in public places they provide something extra which is not provided by trees on private land. And I appreciate what Councillor Varney is saying, that in his particular ward, and to a large extent in mine as well, there are similarities, that there aren't vast opportunities for street trees. There are more than is actually realised if the effort is really made. And I think that, you know, we should not give up on that because there's cost. I think the other thing is that in a number of the areas where the opportunities for street trees are limited, the only trees that can be planted in the front gardens would have to be bonsai. And quite frankly, that's not going to affect climate change or provide a lot of shade. So you can't not support this. It's a good idea. I think, though, that what we need to make certain of is that when the report comes back in 6 months, which it undoubtedly will do, we really examine whether it's looked at as an easy way out rather than doing what's necessary in the public realm, which is planting more street trees, making certain they're available and benefit everybody. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Right, Councillor Varney is mover of the motion. Would you like to respond to the debate?
Yes, thank you very much, my Lord Mayor. I just wanted to thank all the councillors for their supportive comments this evening. Of course, I recognise that the scheme is low-hanging fruit and we need to take greater care of our existing trees. But in the words of a well-known retailer, sorry, I can't quote all those wonderful people that you quoted earlier, but in the words of a well-known retailer, every little helps. And this scheme has potential to deliver thousands of trees right across the city. And if the scheme is a success, why not expand it? For those with smaller gardens, why not the front garden hedge scheme? And for those with no garden, why not provide window boxes and green walls? Every such intervention will help us to meet our carbon neutrality targets. If the motion passes and the subsequent feasibility study report is favourable, we can hopefully get planting in the autumn. And as Councillor Scott said in her maiden speech, congratulations, this would also coincide with Her Majesty the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations, during which we are all being encouraged to plant a green canopy for the Queen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate, and so we will move to the vote on the motion. Once again, this will be an electronic vote on the buttons. Please vote now. Okay, so we have 58 votes in favour, no abstentions and none against, and so the motion is carried. That concludes tonight's meeting. Thank you very much to all members and others who have participated. The next meeting of full council will be the budget meeting on the 15th of February. Good evening.